I'm on the clock. In only 7 slow drafts right now. We'll make those picks today, talk some strategy, and just talk a little ball. I want to jump on here and talk with you guys in the chat. If we don't have a ton of chats, we're going to look at the YouTube comments that I've hit a bunch of good questions on that I wanted to talk about on stream. This is Stealing Signals. Let's go. What's up, guys? Welcome in. You may have noticed new intro audio there. The audio was supposed to be, free use or whatever it is, but got like a copyright thing immediately and wasn't that important. So have changed that audio. GMs to all you guys. Welcome in. Excited to do some picks today. Don't have a ton, but have some. I'm not on the clock in a ton. I was up late last night. Had a golf tournament, did a little poker night with the boys. We don't get together enough. Everyone's got kids and stuff now, but got a group of 8 guys together, played poker all night. It was quite fun. And so I made a bunch of picks like pretty late at night. And then I realized I was going to do a stream this morning. I think some of those timers were, the overnight timers would have been, I could have left them for this morning, but fired off a bunch of not sober picks. So I have no idea how those are going to look. Little Omni Fantasy shout out here. I did not. Zverev might win the French final, huh? I got him on one of my Omni teams. 7 drafts to do here, and then also just some other stuff to talk about. I got Brick's Draft Caddy that you guys have probably seen on Peter Overzet's streams lined up today. So we're going to be able to use that a little bit. I've been having some fun with it. So that's over here in the corner. If you guys want all the extra data that you see on the stream, you got to go to BRIC75.com. Also, I wanted to mention I've gotten a lot of comments on these videos. I've replied to every single one, and I don't think I've really talked about this on the streams, but like a lot of my answers have been very long answers. Like they're turning into like my newsletter posts for those of you who read the newsletter as well. So if you want to go, circle back through the comments at all, I mean, there's not like so many that you wouldn't be able to find the long answers. I got some questions about Tyler Boyd, Ricky Pearsall, did some long answers on those guys. Why I don't diversify as much as some other streamers, and there's a real reason for that. A very specific slow draft decision around a stack versus a wide receiver in the 8th round that I talked through with one of the drafters. A bunch of questions about the mechanics of entering out of state in these tournaments and then being able to draft in state, which obviously I do and talk through. But a ton of like strategy discussions and stuff that maybe if we have time, we will jump into. I was just reading through some of them that are like a week old, and I was like, I mean, this is good stuff that's just buried in the comments. So there was a few long ones on the stream that has the Chargers logo. That might be the first place to look, the thumbnail with the Chargers logo, if you're interested in some of the strategy ones. There was another question about drafting unique teams and correlation. And anyway, have gotten going in the comments on a few of those. GM to you guys, we won't be doing a poodle because I can't. I can't enter. Maybe not sober picks are the best ones. Who knows? Glad you guys are Glad you guys are in here. Dylan says never check out those receipts. I mean, I'm kind of glad that I'm in so many slows that I can't find them because I did want to see what the hell I did this morning, but I'm in too many, and so the world may never know. We're going to come across them, I think. Let's jump in right away to one, and we're going to start on this Best Ball Mania, which is from my first batch. It's, I think, my slowest moving first batch team. I got one from the second batch that's about to catch it. My fastest moving one is already in late 11 here. This Best Ball Mania team has been flying since I entered early last week, or like on Tuesday, 5 days ago. This one I entered in early May, and we're in the 16th round. Going very, very slow. This one right now is a 2-4-7-2 against a Best Ball Mania format. I'm playing a lot of different formats, so we're going to have to consider, what format I actually clicked into. This is and I have nothing in the queue. I still got to figure out Brick's draft capital notes here. I still got to figure out how to best utilize this draft caddy, but we got the matchups on stream. This is the week 15, 16, and 17 matchups next to each name. This is a 2-4-7-2 team. It's a Jared Goff, Deshaun Watson. Not really the strongest quarterback room. Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, Chase Brown, Marshawn Lloyd, the 4 running backs. Amon-Ra St. Brown stacked up. Stephon Diggs, Xavier Worthy, Ladd McConkey, Christian Watson, Jermaine Burton, Wan'Dale Robinson. There must be David Njoku. There is, that goes with Deshaun Watson, and Trey McBride there as well. McBride doesn't correlate. Just wanted to take McBride. Njoku and Watson don't have a Miami bring back. This is, those first drafts that I started before the schedule even released. I couldn't set up a lot of the stuff in the early rounds. As these close out, I'm bummed in a lot of cases at the lack of correlation. I don't have a San Francisco player either. And so then I go to the running back room because, Garendo's way down here. I think, both Elijah Mitchell and Garendo will be interesting. I think I can do that a little later, but that would give me a little bit of a bring back on my Detroit thing. I don't know how to fix the Miami issue because I don't like Malik Washington or Jonnu Smith. I don't really think they're very draftable. How did the golf tournament go? Not very good. we didn't play well. I was saying by the end of it, I started talking like statistics. I was like, I think there's variance in this kind of stuff. Sometimes it all comes together. It was a scramble. I think we played about like our 20th percentile outcome. We could not make a birdie putt the way that, I don't know if you guys have played a lot of these golf tournaments, but sometimes you can use mulligans on the putts and makes it even easier to drain some putts. We couldn't get anything much closer than like 8 feet on our approaches. And then everything from 8 to 12 feet, very makeable, but just couldn't get any of them to go. And so you just everyone gets one try and, no mulligan. Like they have mulligans, but in this tournament, it was only off the tee. As part of the contest. Anyway, we took a lot of pars on holes we should have birdied. Finished, I believe, 6 under. The winner was, I believe, 9 under. There was another element where one of the holes was best ball instead of scramble, which made it a little tougher to score on that hole. People took bogeys because you had to play like an individual score. Anyway, it was fun though. It was a fun tournament, and then getting to play poker after with the guys, like a fun Saturday and in early spring here. Can we get some McMillan today? Sam says. We'll see. That's a possibility. It's a possibility. I don't have a lot of like Tampa, Carolina stacks set up, but he's not a bad late round receiver. All right, this 2-4-7-2 build needs some running backs. I mean, Taylor Swift, Chase Brown, Lloyd is actually like a pretty nice top 4, but I think this is probably going to be a 2-6-8-2 unless I wanted to throw like a Daniel Jones on this. Goff Watson isn't, because it does have Wan'Dale Robinson and it has Jonathan Taylor coming back. So I could do a little bit of a Giants Colts thing. And I could add, as I think through that, another Giants receiver. No neighbors on this team, though. That's when I really like to do that. And I do have concern about Daniel Jones' late season playing time. I don't have anything from Denver on this team, but because I do have Jermaine Burton, I thought maybe that was. It seems like I just wanted to add another interesting receiver piece when I took Burton here, because this is a team that is Amon-Ra, Diggs, worthy. I like those top three, but then McConkey, not a pick that I'm typically making, is the wide receiver 4 on this build. Again, your guess is as good as mine why I took him 2.6 picks before ADP there. Probably was a little bit wide receiver heavy in the room. I took him over Keon Coleman, Brian Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins were the next few to go. Rashee Rice went 73 in this draft, in part because he was probably still on his slide when we were in the 7th round, because, again, this draft's been going on for over a month. He goes in the 80s now. And I didn't get JSN or Deontay come back to me, so I took Christian Watson at 78. I just felt like I was behind at receiver, I guess. But these are not – I mean, this is not good receiver depth. Javon Baker is there and is one of the ADP values at this point. Does do a little bit of a bring back on McConkey. It makes Drake May an option as well if I wanted to go for a third quarterback in 17 or 18. Would make it a 5 running back build with one of these San Francisco running backs as the 5th. I'd be okay with that on a team with Jonathan Taylor, where you're kind of banking on him to be a 17-week stud. I'm going to throw Baker on this. I got the San Francisco running backs in there. Both Daniel Jones and Drake May now could provide a little bit more quarterback upside. Tight end's fine at 2 with Trey McBride and Njoku. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that got me 8 receivers, which I need on this build. Yeah, that team should work out okay. I mean, it's not going to be my favorite team, but all right. So we have a couple Superflex puppies, 3 eliminators, another BBM. Let's see. What do we got from Aaron? It says, "Hey brother, also in Washington, registered in Washington, but travel to California and Oregon for business. Can I start a draft there and finish in Washington?" Yeah, so I've answered this question in the YouTube comments a couple times, just for anyone that's curious about the specifics of this, because I've been getting this question a lot, because I am doing these slow streams and talking through how I can't do the fasts in my state. It's only about where you register. It doesn't even matter where, whether the contest even starts. So one of the great comments from the last stream, I can't remember exactly who it was, but I think it was from Paul V, if I remember correctly, was that you could enter like one of the slower filling contests like 50 times, and then each time a slow fills, like you wouldn't have to go back out of state. It'll trickle through over the course of like a month or 2 months. You'll actually layer out your entries. But the point I'm making is that it's just when you register. So even if you register for a bunch of drafts and they don't all fill right away, a bunch of slows, and you get back home and the back end of that 50 drafts that you enter doesn't fill for weeks, because you paid and registered for this contest while you were out of state. That's the sort of the legal element of it, as far as I've been told and understand, and conversations I've had in the way that I'm doing it. So I enter the slows out of state, come back home, and I can actually manage the drafts and make the picks and everything in state, which a lot of people, I just learned this last summer. A lot of people don't know that yet, but it's probably a little bit of a gray area that they don't like super advertise. I don't know all the specifics, but if you're in a state that you can't enter underdog drafts like me, you can still travel out of state. And then people ask me about VPNs and stuff. Like, you have to get the app, and then they use the location services on your phone. Underdog's really good about this stuff as far as like the regulatory side of it. It's not good for, trying to skirt rules if you're inclined to do so. So the VPN and all that kind of stuff doesn't necessarily, it's going to tell you to turn your location services on your phone. So I have to physically get my phone across the border, and then with, on my person. So I've had questions about devices and stuff. I answered in the chat, but bring your phone with you, wherever your phone is that has the app on it and is registered with Underdog. But yeah, once you do that, you're above board. You just enter the drafts in another state, come back home and draft them. All right, Nick thinks Mims feels really undervalued. Marvin Mims, I'm starting to really feel this way. I felt like his lack of usage last year was a pretty big concern, but he was efficient. And Peyton has been as upfront and clear as you can be that it's on them that he didn't play a lot and all of those things. I feel good about the Broncos offense. I've been a little bit concerned about the way Sean Payton's offenses operate in terms of the running back passes that I've talked a lot about. I think they could have upwards of 200 running back targets this year, which would be a massive increase over any team last year. The Broncos led the league last year with 153. With Bo Nix now in place, I do think there's this possibility for I wrote about this in my recent newsletter about the perfect storm elements, where we could see outliers in certain situations in the NFL this year. I think a rookie quarterback who has a proclivity for checking down and does it accurately could lead to a perfect storm of running back targets this year. In which case, there's not as much when those offenses have existed in Sean Payton's past. There's not as many downfield targets, of course. Even when they threw a ton, when they had Drew Brees, they throw 600 times a year, playing in a dome, which obviously Denver's going to be, they're going to have some cold games. Even on those teams, they typically had one X receiver. It was Marcus Colston, it was Jimmy Graham, it was Michael Thomas, obviously, and then they did a lot of rotational stuff, rotational deep threat stuff. The volume was never particularly great for the secondary options. I remember way back when I really loved Lance Moore as a talent and was very efficient, but could just never get the volume. Robert Meacham, Devery Henderson, those guys were rotational deep threats. But if you look last year, Sutton and Jeudy actually had very, very similar volume. It wasn't just Sutton. And the reason we think Sutton had such a better year is I think he's outscored him touchdown-wise 10-2. He had 10 touchdowns. Sutton had 2, if I have that right. There's definitely a gap in touchdowns. There's another situation similar to that on a different team that the 10-2 specific numbers might be related to that other team. I'm pretty sure that's Sutton and Jeudy. I'm just going to look it up. I don't want to tell you guys a lie. But their target volume, their per route stuff, all very, very close. So, and then the idea is that that Sean Payton has said is that Jeudy was basically playing the position they wanted for Mims. Yeah, it was 10-2. Sutton had 10 TDs. Jeudy had 2. 90 targets, 87 targets. 59 catches, 54 catches. 772 yards, 758 yards. Very, very close. And Sutton was the higher number on each of those, but ran a few more routes. And so you look at it per route, it's almost identical. But Sutton had 10 touchdowns, so Jeudy had 2. If Mims can be in that sort of Jeudy role, and Peyton said that, then I think that's strong. The early concern for me was the Troy Franklin addition as well, but he was a day 3 pick. But in fairness, they traded up to the second pick of day 3 to make sure they got him once he fell, and he was a faller, and he didn't fall any further. They were like, we're going to make sure after day 2 ends and nobody took this guy, we have an overnight time. We're going to talk about getting a trade up in place, and they got that in place, and everyone likes to trade up at the beginning of day 3. It happens almost every year, so I'm sure there was some competition to move up as well. They were willing to come up and get Franklin. Having said that, it's still a 4th-round pick. My concern was adding Franklin. You have Franklin and Mims as these rotational deep threats, and they're kind of cannibalizing a little bit. I have the Mims profile is still really good from a prospect profile perspective, even if you understand that, it was a bad first year. I think there's elements of it there was enough efficiency and enough explosive plays that you can certainly talk yourself into and not being a complete disaster and him not being, irredeemable. And he was a 21-year-old rookie. He was an early declare. He just turned 22 here in March a couple months ago. Played his whole rookie season at 21. And so it's like, all right, this guy could just develop. Anyway, I've come around to this idea that Mims could be like the pretty clear number 2. And Franklin's going ahead of him. I'm now taking Mims over Franklin and a lot more exposed to Mims than to Franklin. because I do like the Denver offense. It's kind of a cheap. That's like probably my favorite cheap offense. I'm not really doing like a ton of the cheap Patriot stuff, doing some of it, but Denver's the one that I've been in on. And Mims is the path for that team that I'm starting to feel a lot better about, particularly because of those Jerry Jeudy comments and some of those other things. So that's a fun one to think through for sure. Dustin saying is getting more in on the Brissett play. I think they keep May on the bench. This is my big concern. I actually think they're setting the groundwork for. I talked about this a little on ship chasing last week. I don't want to go into it a ton right now. I think they're setting the groundwork for benching May for a longer period of the season than people are maybe considering or prepared for. Aaron says, appreciate detailing this out. By the way, if you guys do this, if you're the slow drafters like me, you can use the Signals promo code Signals, SIGNALS. It gets you the current deal. You'll get like a deposit match. I think it's up to $250 in bonus funds. There's not like different. You're not going to get a better promo using someone else's code, but you will help me out. So use the Signals code if you go sign up at Underdog as a result of this little chat about how that's possible. Yeah, it's just like DFS. You can enter the tournament and then edit the entry later. There are people every week in DFS that drive out of state just to do all their entries and then come home and then they tinker with their lineups right up till Sunday morning. It's also, as I understand it, similar to like the season-long formats where you can draft out of state and then manage your team for the whole football season. Yeah, so Dylan confirmed something that I may or may not have tried as well, but that he tried NordVPN on the laptop last year, went on vacation. It didn't work for the Underdog location settings. Not sure if VPNs will start supporting UD or other. I don't think it's the VPN or anything. I think it's that Underdog's security system is strong, and they've done it correctly to not be on the wrong side. They do a lot of stuff correctly, and their way of making sure that they're not going to be on the wrong side of any regulatory stuff is to use the location settings from your phone, because their app is such a huge thing. You get the app on your phone, and then that's the at least this is my understanding. Like I have not gotten that confirmed or talked to anyone or whatever, but it's why I have a lot of people be like, oh, why don't you just use a VPN? It's so much easier. What are you doing? You're driving all the way out of state? Like, you're an idiot. I'm like, well, no, I mean, my understanding at least is that I need to physically get out of state. We all think that there's workarounds in this world, but one of the there would have been a few years ago, but we're getting so advanced with everything that now there are actually ways. The security and all that stuff, geolocation, they know where your phone is, man. Like, I don't think there's a way to, I don't know. Maybe if you guys got that figured out, DM me. But I've had the same results as Dylan. How am I splitting Brooks and Hubbard across my drafts? I'm basically not drafting Hubbard because everything's so back weighted. And I do think they're going to bring Brooks along slowly coming off his ACL. But I do think Carolina had a really rough year last year. They're going to try to my read on Carolina is if they're 2-10 after 12 weeks, they're still going to try really hard to get to 7-10 and win those final 5 games. I think I've said that exact line a couple times this offseason. But they had such a bad year last year, and they didn't want to be bad last year because they weren't tanking, because they didn't even have their first round pick. They tried so hard to be good down the stretch last year, and it just didn't work. And, Bryce Young has gotten hammered. The organization has gotten hammered for taking him over Stroud. What's his face? The owner is absolutely getting hammered as the new Dan Snyder. I can't even think of his name right now. And I don't think he's a great owner. But you bring in Dave Canales and you bring in it's a change of, culture. And this is a team that's going to try to win down the stretch regardless. And I think they're going to probably be bad again. But regardless if they're good or bad, they're not going to give up on the season. They're going to try to win. But they're going to try to win in a way that's promising for the future. And to that end, they drafted Brooks in the second round as their running back of the future. He's coming off an ACL. I don't think they're going to push him too hard in a season that they're not going to be super competitive. But I do think that when they get to a certain point, they're going to go with Brooks the rest of the way, and everything matters down the stretch. And unless Brooks gets hurt again, like it's almost like Hubbard's a handcuff for the important weeks, but he's a handcuff for a guy that won't have the first 10 games or whatever to potentially get injured and elevate Hubbard. We know the guy that he's a handcuff behind is going to not play and risk injury for a significant chunk of the season. And then when he's back is like right when we need Hubbard to be. So like Brooks would need to get hurt right when he gets back on the field. It's this weird dynamic that because Brooks is going to be brought along slowly, the opportunity for Hubbard to be used heavily in the money weeks narrows because Brooks isn't out there taking hits all season. Now, Hubbard is like a decent advanced rate player in the first few weeks, but there's just not a lot of value in that. There's not a lot of value in running back production in the first few weeks, even though he's a really late pick. I do think in certain builds, you could make a case that getting those points in the first 5 to 10 weeks will be helpful because I do think he's probably the lead back for the first few months. And maybe I'm just overstating all this and they end up in a 50-50 split and Hubbard's actually, able to post some usable weeks in the fantasy playoffs as well. Or maybe he's good in the early season and then Brooks does get banged up again when he comes back. Maybe just, maybe it's not a serious thing, but he gets an ankle sprain or something, has to miss some time. I definitely see paths for Hubbard. It's hard for me to make a bet where I'm like, in the money weeks, this guy's going to be the backup. And then I am taking Brooks because I'm like, in the money weeks, he's going to be, I think, a workhorse. But I have to be very cognizant in those running back builds that my expectation is Brooks will be a 0 for like the first 2 months, the first like 8 weeks, that I need the rest of my running back room to get me through in an advanced rate sense. And then I have Brooks as a late season hammer. Then I think the question people will ask is why, would you consider taking Brooks and Hubbard together? Because Hubbard would then become the advanced rate play. Brooks would become the late season hammer. And it's probably not even that crazy, really. I mean, these guys have a week 11 bye. I think it's possible that Brooks really takes over after the bye, that he's playing before the bye, but not really giving you ceiling. And maybe a usable week or two before the week 11 bye, but not a lot of ceiling of usage and volume. And then after the week 11 bye, potentially he's really good. Week 12 down the stretch, week 12 on. Hubbard could be good the first 10 weeks. I mean, and at their costs, like maybe it is a strategy to take them both. I want the out to Brooks playing more, to my read being wrong, to Brooks being back in a heavy way in week 5. And then if I'm taking Hubbard with Brooks, I don't want, Hubbard's a bet against Brooks in the money weeks. I was basically just detailing. And so I don't want to be betting. I would rather have Hubbard on a team if I was going to draft him that I didn't have Brooks because it's a bet against Brooks playing. I don't think you ever really want to play. I mean, they might have a good combined advance rate. I don't know. I think it limits your upside a little bit, but I guess in a 0 RB build, I would try to find the Hubbard play somewhere else. I think you can still do it with like a Jerome Ford and then just bet, because like what happens then is that like Nick Chubb never comes back healthy, but Brooks is the late season hammer for Carolina. You maybe have Ford and Brooks both performing for you in the money weeks. You have an out to having both, right? When you don't draft the 2 players from the same team. Anyway, this is one of the most interesting running back rooms this offseason for sure. And I think there's a lot of differing opinions on it, but this is the way that I'm thinking it will play out before having really heard a ton about Brooks rehab and what they'll tell us in July and August. Like my opinion on that might change, but that's like my operating theory, and then why I'm drafting Brooks but not drafting Hubbard. Is a 4 QB best ball build too many? Let's bring back the Sonics. I love that. Had all 3 of my QBs get wrecked last year. Yeah, one of the things with best ball is like you have to just let your individual teams die when they die. And I know that sucks, but like you can't build in contingencies for everything. So just because you had a team that had 3 QBs all get wrecked last year, you can't draft a bunch of 4 QB teams or even any 4 QB teams, because now you're going to have contingency issues at other positions. What ends up happening usually is people look at the onesie positions and they don't want to take zeros, so they get, more concerned about that. It's harder, I think, for people to recognize how a lack of depth at running back or wide receiver can basically sap any upside and make your team a loser as well. I've talked about this as we've talked through the Eliminator, where I did come around and say and continue to believe that the 3 QB structure does make a lot of sense. I still think you should be trying to go 2 tight ends, because I do think you still want the extra depth at running back and receiver as much as possible, because you will have injuries and stuff like that. I mean, you can't just assume you're going to be healthy, and so you have to pick and choose where your contingencies are, where you're building depth. You can't do it everywhere. 4 QBs is too much contingency at that position. On the Sean Payton Saints, what did the target distribution look like after Thomas? I mean, let's go look at that, because I've made this point a couple times, and I don't want to go on to it a ton, but let's just real quick jump into New Orleans. We're going to go to their franchise encyclopedia. The Michael Thomas years were 2017, 18, 19. He was their leading receiver. So let's go to the 2017 Saints. Michael Thomas had 149 targets. Kamara had 100 as the running back, right? Mark Ingram was third with 71. You have Ted Ginn as the rotational deep threat. The next non-X receiver target guy is Ted Ginn at 70 targets. And then Brandon Coleman has 37. Kobe Fleener has 30 as the top tight end. This is what I'm talking about with because then you go 30, 22 for Josh Hill, 16 for Willie Snead, 14 for Tommy Lee Lewis, 10 for Michael Huamana-Wanui. That was his, he's the tight end 3 on this team. And so you actually get 6 guys between 10 and 40 targets. And Ted Ginn was the main other dude that got up to 70. But really, it's the running backs and Michael Thomas. That's what I was kind of trying to describe. That's what I always remember with these teams when I would do projections and stuff, is that the number 1 target share is nice, and then the rest of it is really tough. So, again, the next year, Michael Thomas, 147 targets, Kamara, 105. Next player after that is Ben Watson with 46. That's it. Traquan Smith, 44. Ted Ginn, 30. Mark Ingram only had 27 that year. He only played 12 games. Josh Hill, 24. Kirkwood, 21. Dan Arnold, 19. Austin Carr, 14. I'm going this low to emphasize again that this is somewhat rare, that this many players had about a target a game, right? Austin Carr had 14 in 14 games. Dan Arnold had about 2 targets per game. You usually don't see teams be 8 deep as well in terms of having 15 to 30 targets. That's what happens. The rest of it doesn't get consolidated. 2019 Saints. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be the exact same way, but okay, then this is the year Michael Thomas breaks the receptions record. He has 185 targets. Behind him, Kamara had 97. Now, I don't know also that there's going to be a Kamara in this offense. I think it could be Javonte Williams in terms of usage, which is why I'm on him in a big way. But even if there's not a running back to consolidate like Kamara did in his prime, this is Kamara's age 22, 23, and 24 seasons. Kamara has 97 targets here. I think there's going to be 97 running back targets. It would just go to Javonte plus someone else, right? The distribution in that regard is going to be similar, because it was last year with Denver, and then they went and got the quarterback that fits that. Sean Payton knows his system. I feel pretty strongly about that element. The running back targets are going to be there. Now, the number 1 receiver, Courtland Sutton's not going to have 185 targets or 150 either. He's not Michael Thomas. This is prime Michael Thomas target earning as well. And that's the part of it where, if you look at last year's Denver team, it was Sutton and Judy. They didn't have the Michael Thomas. They didn't have the prime Jimmy Graham, who was basically that guy, even as a tight end. But he was a tight end who split out wide so much that when it came time to franchise tag him, there became conversation about whether he should get the wide receiver number. He was the first, you're not really a tight end. So they had a couple, legit number 1s. Sutton's probably not on that level. But anyway, in this season as well, behind, Thomas is 185, behind Kamara's 97, Jared Cook at 65 targets is the next guy. He has a 9 touchdown season that year. He's actually pretty usable this season. This is one of his good years there. But behind him, Ted Ginn, 56 targets, Latavius Murray, 43, obviously another running back at that point. You see this one is actually a little thinner. I was just talking about how it gets a little deeper on those other teams that we saw down to the 10-plus targets. On this one, Josh Hill, 35, Traquan, 25, Taysom Hill, 22. And then you're down to a running back, Zach Line, having 10. I think he's their fullback at the time. Deontay Hardy only had 6. 4 for Dan Arnold, 4 for Austin Carr. Like, you are down to guys that had 6 and 4 targets the whole season. So it's a little bit more concentrated, a little bit less spread out down here, but mostly because it was Michael Thomas's 185 target season and Kamara's going for 97. I don't think it's going to be that concentrated at the top for the Broncos, but this is the Sean Payton offense. It's the way it's been for a lot of years. I mean, I can go. So Michael Thomas gets hurt the next year. So it's going to look a little bit different, but like, let's go back to 2016, even when you have Brandon Cooks on the team. Little bit different with Cooks, I bet. Yeah. So Thomas was 121, I think, as a rookie. Cooks was 117. Willie Snead was 104. This is a much different team. This is before Alvin Kamara as well. The running back targets are more spread out. They're still high, the total targets. You get 58 for Ingram, 54 for Travaris Cadet, 26 for Tim Hightower. It's still, 130 plus. But Kobe Fleener had 81 targets this year too. This is a good counter to what I was just saying. This is when Michael Thomas was a rookie and wasn't the target dominant player, and things did spread out more. And I think you could say, as a volume earner, young Michael Thomas, rookie year Michael Thomas, is probably more comparable, or Sutton right now, even in his prime, is more comparable to young Michael Thomas than he is to prime Michael Thomas, who was one of the great target earners of his generation. Obviously, he broke the NFL receptions record for a season. The year prior, in 2015, is before Michael Thomas. We have Brandon Cooks at 129, Ben Watson at 110, Snead at 101. Again, a little bit more balance at the top. Marcus Colston, 67. The running backs come in well over 100, 120 with Kyren Robinson's there. And then down here, Hightower and Cadet had some targets. Running backs had close to 150 again as well. A little bit more balance on these iterations of these teams. But if you go back even further to when Jimmy Graham was there, okay, and so this is the later part of Marcus Colston as well, but 125 for Jimmy Graham in his final season there, 100 for Colston, 83 for Stills. A little more balance here as well, actually. This is rookie year Brandon Cooks. Maybe I'm overstating the Michael Thomas years. This is a good question. I'm glad I pulled those up because challenges me to actually look at the data, but that's what I've been trying to describe as the concern. Looking at some of those other years actually gets me more interested in Marvin Mims again. So that stuff's interesting. Dylan says, I know you think the Broncos running back catches will be high with these smaller slot guys like Mims and Franklin, possibly eat into the running back catches via design passes. It's possible, but I don't think that it will be a significant chunk out of the running back volume, because the one thing you can see from, I know this is true from all Sean Payton's teams, because I just wrote it up the other day, is he always is high in running back targets. I went through his 15 seasons in New Orleans. And so over that stretch in the NFL, there were 480 team seasons, and all 15 of his seasons ranked in the top 70 of those 480 team seasons in running back targets. They also almost always ranked high in running back reception efficiency. So they would actually rank higher in receptions than in targets. I was just doing it on targets because, people like to think in terms of volume, but I actually think there's an efficiency element too, because he designs running back passes in a more efficient way than when teams are just kind of going to the check down and sometimes throwing it away near a running back or whatever. These are extended handoffs. They are higher catch rates. If you go look at running backs in Sean Payton's system, a lot of that probably has to do with Drew Brees, but even last year with Russell Wilson, catch rates over 80% for all three backs, which is high, it's strong. But yeah, all 15 of his seasons were in the top 70. That's like the 85th percentile of that sample of 480 team seasons over those 15 years. All 15 of Sean Payton's 85th percentile are higher, including, 99th percentile with his top teams that are like, second, third overall. It's a really strong trend. I thought it was potentially, more Drew Brees focused, but then you go look at what he did with Russell Wilson last year and ranked number 1 in RB targets with a quarterback who had typically never really thrown to running backs. He was an extend the play, deep shot kind of guy. Anyway, I spent a lot of time talking about these guys. We gotta move past. Look at this, the consigliere. I was Neil's first super chat. Am I yours? Thank you, Gretch. You are. I have monetized you guys. I think the only thing I have turned on right now is super chats. I don't want to do a bunch of ads and everything right away, but we got there. We got to 1,000 subs, all the watch hours. I appreciate all you guys. By the way, if you're watching the stream, like, subscribe, comment. I will give you like a lot of feedback if it's a question that requires a lot of feedback. I enjoy doing those things. The people demand a 5 a.m. live stream documenting the drive to register for the next wave of contests. That's an in-car live stream seems a little bit dangerous. It is a glorious moment or morning for slows. I agree, Star Kindler. Gobbler says, why are you so convinced Brooks will be brought along slowly? Every sign is he's ready to go week 1. Mostly because, I'm not like, I probably shouldn't position myself as that convinced. It's mostly because I think they want to win this year, but I also think they have to be practical, and they will be practical. This year's more about developing Bryce Young. I don't think the Jonathan Brooks pick is to help them win in 2024. It's to help them win in 2025, 2026. They're trying to build this team up. They went 1-16 last year or whatever it was. They had the worst record in football. I do think they want to be better, but they went 2-15. I don't think they're like so crazy to think that they're going to like compete for a Super Bowl in 2024, which would be the justification for taking an ACL recovery running back and pushing him in his rookie year. Because most rookies aren't even pushed when they're healthy. Like the idea that, I know he was the first running back taken, but he's a second-round pick. There's a lot of second-round running backs when there's veterans on the team. Like you got to remember, Miles Sanders is still on the roster too. They gave him a bunch of guaranteed money, and then they benched him, but he's not going to get cut. Like he is all guaranteed money. It would be just sunk cost. I mean, if they cut him, they think he's completely dust because they don't owe anything else to keep him around. It's already all paid. And it's a lot of dead money. It's like $7 million in dead money that they would be admitting is like not, I think they'll just keep him is the point. So you have Chuba, you have Miles Sanders. That's the other part of it is like, even after they drafted him, I was like, well, makes sense because they have this Miles Sanders contract and they're going to use Sanders some in the first half of the season still, even after they benched him last year, because they're not going to cut him. At least that was like my immediate read. And so it makes sense that they would be willing to draft the Jonathan Brooks, who's a little bit more of a rest project type. Is it possible they play him right away? Yeah. I mean, it's definitely possible that they want to prove something and they want to push and they want to try to win games right away. And so they go for that. I guess I would be surprised even if they did that, if they could stick with that for 17 games after they start losing some games, if they could really justify playing him that much right away and risking, because running backs can start to compile multiple big injuries, and then it's a real concern. Look at like J.K. Dobbins and stuff like that. We know there's like a lot of information about like the compensation injuries and stuff. Like, his ACL tear was in like November. It was late in the year. He played most of the year. He played like 10 games. It was towards the end of the college football season. I know he's rehabbing hard, all that stuff. I cannot imagine a world where they would be pushing him in week 1 over the competent veterans. Competent is whatever. Maybe you don't think Miles Sanders is competent, but it just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like that's the way it's going to go. But So I guess I am convinced. I just started by saying I shouldn't position myself as convinced. There's certainly uncertainty with my stance there, but that's how I'm playing it. And I do actually feel pretty convinced about it. I should be willing to admit that as I talk through it. New to the Stealing Signals group. What's up, boys and girls? Welcome, Andrew. Enjoy having you here. Appreciate you. GM to Bindles. Slow Draft King. We got some more. Appreciate you liking and subscribing, Andrew. Everyone be like Andrew. Oh, Nick saying the Panthers GM actually said we can't become good over one offseason. The first step is just to become respectable. I mean, if that's their mindset, which I think it is. Miles Sanders just got his CDL. What's that? Commercial driver's license? Is that he's going to become a trucker? Is that what CDL is? Having a good weekend. I AMT Peter. Appreciate you. Talked about it a little bit at the top of the stream. Got to play some golf, some poker yesterday. I'm having a great weekend. All right, let's go make a draft pick here. This is a 0-1-3-0. We're in the 5th round. I have 1 running back and 3 receivers. Let's go into the draft. Bijan, Olave, Diggs, Zay Flowers. I did the Diggs-Zay combo. Good values there. I get Diggs late in the 3rd at 32, and then I get Zay Flowers at 41. He's been mostly going in the late 3rd. Sometimes you can get him in the early 4th, but like Lamar goes at the turn in this one with Derrick Henry. A lot of times Lamar gets stacked with Zay, right? Or Tank goes at the turn, and then Tank and Zay are the Houston-Baltimore thing. There's probably not a lot of Diggs-Zay out there. So got to feel good about that. But what format is this? Okay, this is BBM. That's a good BBM start, man. Bijan, Olave, Diggs, Flowers. And then I'm up at 508, and I haven't gone tight end yet. You guys know I love to get tight ends in these ranges, and Kincaid is behind ADP by 5 picks. He's the pick I really want to make, but Stroud's also behind ADP, and I have the Diggs Flowers thing. I could also go like Hollywood. I could go Xavier. This Xavier Worthy. This feels like a room, though, that's going to let me have some receiver values. I'm going to take the Kincaid value because this is also a pick that, I mean, I really like to make at pick 56. Getting Kincaid at 508, I've probably taken him at 41, where I took Zay. Like out of this, 8 slot in the earlier 4th round, Kincaid will go 3-4 turns sometimes when people get really excited about him. With Josh Allen sometimes. Oh, the Josh Allen drafter's behind me. He's not happy. He thought he was getting Kincaid at 57. But I mean, I got to draft my team. And Mark Andrews was off the board. Even Kyle Pitts was off the board there. Kyle Pitts had gone at pick 50. Andrews at 53. I would have Kincaid as my tight end 4, essentially, ahead of Pitts and Andrews. And not crazy far behind like McBride in terms of value. I like him better than his ADP, so to get him at a discount is just, and structurally, you guys know I love the elite tight ends. And shout out Pete Overzet. Great video talking through the elite tight ends, looking at some of the research that's been done around the industry. A lot of good conversation around the elite tight ends. All right. Let's do some Eliminator stuff. The Puppy Superflex, I got into a bunch of those. I told you guys I had so much fun drafting. The first one I did, I got Bo Nix at pick 144, and I was like, ADPs are broken. No one knows how to play Superflex. This is amazing. I'm going to freaking dominate this format. I got Derek Carr and Daniel Jones at 96, 97 at the turn, like right around pick 100. Those guys now, and all the other ones I'm in, are gone by like pick 60. QB is being pushed way up. Daniel Jones is still here in this one, not 60, but QB's being pushed way up. I have all these slows going in a format now that I don't even want to play because like it got more efficient quickly. So my first couple fast drafts lied to me about what I was going to be seeing, and now I think it's fairly efficient. And now, but they take more time. Superflex drafts, they take more time because you have to analyze a fourth position pretty intently. And I'm finding myself pushing quarterback a lot more. Like I like to be quarterback heavy in best ball Superflex. Like I like to have 4 starters if people are going to let you. But these drafts aren't really letting me. And so I think you can also have basically 1 starter and then you're super flexing out the other positions. You obviously need to take other QBs, but like 1 clear starter and then some, later round playing time question marks as other QB options because you can get so dominant the Superflex. And I do have some of these Superflex teams that are incredibly fun at the non-QB positions. It's neither of these two because this is a 2 QB build already, and this one's a 1 QB with only 2 receivers. But I have some that are like 1 QB with 4 receivers. Oh, here, I starred one of them. I actually did one of the things again. Let's look at this. I'll explain like one of the ways I do that when I get in the QB heavy draft. So this is a really QB heavy draft. You can see a lot of purple near the top. Jared Goff has gone by the 304. Like Justin Herbert was the 303. All this stuff gets hammered around that 2-3 turn. And then the Cousins, Stafford, Deshaun Watson, Aaron Rodgers group all gets hammered. I decided to go Drake London at 308. And then, all the whole next tier of quarterbacks gets hammered before my 405. And so Baker Mayfield was the top quarterback I was looking at that point. But I was also looking at Malik Neighbors at that point, who I've taken in the second round of regular drafts a ton. And I'm like, okay, like Amon-Ra, Drake London, Malik Neighbors start is fine. I actually have Anthony Richardson as well. It's a bring back. Malik Neighbors in these Superflex drafts is way down in ADP relative to like positional stuff and where he is in Best Ball Mania and where you'll see him go. Definitely somebody to go get exposure to. And then Stephon Diggs comes back around to 56 in the later 5th round. And he's another dude that like, yeah, I know he's sliding right now into like the mid 3rd in regular drafts, but 2-3 turn guy for a while. And it still goes there in the regular draft sometimes. Suddenly he's going at 56. So I have 4 of my top, 15 or 20-ish wide receivers when you have Amon-Ra, London, Neighbors, and Diggs. And you might be like, hey, you can only start 2 receivers in this format, but there is still a flex. And because of this build, with only Anthony Richardson at quarterback, I'm going to need wide receiver help at Superflex. So if all 4 of these guys are studs, they're going to be in my flex and my Superflex. You can go this direction with it too. This is the type of team that people talk about when they're like, yeah, if you go, single quarterback early, you can build a monster. Like you can get some of this stuff to fall to you. But anyway, overall, the Superflex drafts have been, I have a couple teams like that with really good wide receivers, but the Superflex drafts have been a little bit more efficient than they first were. And I had entered all of these slows. And now that I'm talking about them, I'm going to jump in and do these before the eliminators. But it's been a little bit more of a grind on these. So this is a team where I went CJ Stroud, Caleb Williams, QB start. I got Nico to pair up in the 3rd. I went ahead and took him over like a Drake London, who I do think he's like a tier behind. That was, I know, a tough call, but I wanted to get that stack going. I get Waddle in the 4th. Again, a guy that I'm willing to take in the 2nd round of basically any Best Ball Mania. He falls, I think, quite a bit at this point. You're talking about Waddle versus like a Matthew Stafford or Deshaun Watson. That's the point of Superflex drafts. You don't want to be drafting quarterback. Is it the point where the gap between the caliber of quarterback you're taking, and I think Stafford and Watson could be fine this year, but the point is at the very top, there's the elite quarterbacks, and the gap between the elite quarterbacks and the elite position players in a Superflex format is going to be fairly narrow. You're at least getting an elite at the quarterback position, and it could be a big positional advantage. And then way down in like the 10th round, if you start getting down into like where, maybe Bo Nix is going 8th round, 9th round, whatever, or you get into whoever, Gardner Minshew or something even later, you're already outside the premier skill position players, so that gap narrows again, where you can start to make a swing on a Justin Fields or an Aiden O'Connell or whatever you want to do, because the opportunity cost is like, I don't know, like the Nick Chubb range of running backs and Austin Eckler and stuff. And you're outside the wide receiver window, and you're definitely outside the elite tight end window and all of that stuff. And so at a certain point towards the back of the single digit rounds and into the early double digit rounds in Superflex, it again becomes worthwhile from a value perspective to consider taking some upside swings at quarterback. The gap between it, the opportunity cost element, isn't that high anymore once those good players go off. But in this range where you're starting to talk about like the QB 20, QB 25 in some cases, versus, Baker Mayfield goes one pick before Sam Laporta versus the tight end 1, right? This is the range in Superflex drafts. You do not want to be drafting quarterbacks at all costs, basically. You want to be hammering QBs early, potentially, or you want to be doing like an early and late strategy. Sean Siegel talked about this a little bit on our recent episode of Stealing Bananas. I was asking, we got a very QB heavy room. He talked about how historically, in a different format, not on Underdog, but over on FFPC, the one elite quarterback and then wait strategy has had really good win rates over on FFPC. And that makes a lot of sense because, again, I found a lot of success with the 2 early QBs, or sometimes even a third or relatively early QB, depending on how the room falls. Because you can build a really dominant QB room if people will let you. But I think finding that success or finding the wait on QB success, both are emphasizing not to be drafting QBs in what is essentially the QB dead zone, right? We talk about the running back dead zone. In Superflex, you don't want to be taking Baker Mayfield for need over an impact player like Sam Laporta. Although this drafter does get Travis Kelce coming back, they must have been thinking, look, I can get an elite tight end on the way back either way. I really have to get a QB here. Looks like they already had Lamar, though. So I would have probably argued they could have kept pushing that. They could have taken Laporta plus Diggs, which is another. They could have taken Neighbors. They could have done a lot of things. After Neighbors goes here, for me, I'd take McBride, and then I get Tank Dell coming back. I have Nico and Dell now with Stroud. I have Caleb Williams. I was hoping that Keenan Allen would come back here. Do I have DJ Moore on this one? I did take DJ Moore with Caleb Williams on one of these. Keenan Allen does come back. He's a top wide receiver by ADP. He's also one that's pushed down a little bit in ADP. Peter Overzet was talking about this on Ship Chasing, but all the different contests have different ADPs, and so there's some positional inefficiencies. Keenan Allen goes a little higher versus some of these other receivers. Like, he's almost always going ahead of Terry McLaurin, at least in the drafts that I've seen, and Hollywood Brown, who's been rising. But I feel like Keenan Allen usually goes ahead of both those dudes. But in this ADP set, they look a little closer, and people are just looking at this ADP set. So he definitely goes ahead of Jaden Reed and Calvin Ridley and the rest of this group. Xavier Worthy's a guy I would love to take here as well, but I think for the stack value, getting the 4th receiver in Keenan Allen makes a lot of sense. I've starred basically every player that's on the different, bring backs and stacks, but I also started some QBs and said I might need to go QB here because I still I have 2. I think that was if Keenan Allen goes and I don't really love my wide receiver options, it might be the right pocket in the 7th round to hit my QB3. I'm going to keep pushing that because I want to see how long I can push the quarterback in these situations. Getting Keenan here, getting this stack with Caleb Williams and having the Stroud, Nico, Tank Dell stacked together as well. Having 2 good QBs stacked up, plus Jalen Waddle and Trey McBride with those other premium picks in rounds 4 and 5, that QB dead zone range. I had a lot of firepower with Jalen Waddle and Trey McBride in that range. That's how we're going to play that Superflex pick. Let's look at the other one. This is 111, the other one that I'm on the clock right now. I went Tyreek Hill and took Burrow on the way back. I think typically I would probably just take Burrow there, but I think I was going to try to do like 2 elite receivers if they let me have Jefferson come back. But I took Burrow with Tyreek here. Olave. See, because I don't think the gap. I mean, some people say that Burrow's ceiling isn't that high. I think he gets a little bit of a bad rap. If you look at Burrow by points per game in his best seasons, he wasn't all the way up at the elites, but he wasn't with the mass of quarterback scoring that is the reason that late round quarterback can succeed. He was a half tier above that, a half tier below the elites. I'm going to give some numbers to support that because I keep hearing that Burrow wasn't. Even when he was good, he wasn't that good, essentially. What year was it? 20. It was one of the first big elite QB years. Was it 2022 that he had his best season? Yeah, this is the year I'm thinking of, 2022, where Allen, Hurts, and Mahomes were all between, in whatever scoring system I'm looking at, different quarterbacks, different scoring systems. Actually, I can choose Underdog here. Okay. Points per game. Allen, Hurts, Mahomes were all between 24.8 and 25.3 in Underdog points. So they're all right around 25 points per game. Burrow was at 22.3. No other quarterback was above 20.5, which was Justin Fields. Lamar Jackson was at 20.1. He was left some of those games hurt. And then below Fields and Jackson, you get down to the next guy was Geno Smith, 18.5. So Burrow's 4 points per game ahead of Geno. He's 2 points per game ahead of Lamar and Fields. He's still at least 2 points per game, 2.5 points per game behind each of the big three, but he's a half tier up from everyone else. And, non-Fields and Lamar Jackson division, he was 4 points up from everyone else, which is meaningful. That's when you got the massive quarterbacks. Then there was a ton of quarterbacks between 15 points per game and 18 points per game. But Burrow's up here at 22. I mean, I do think he has a little bit of a ceiling like that. And so anyway, I think he's an example of a QB that, yes, I have to bypass Breece Hall and Bijan, but he can be a difference-making QB in a way that makes this pick not as massive of a drop-off from those guys as it feels like. And again, that really only happens at the very top of the draft, although it goes away quick. I don't know if Jordan Love can be that pick yet. I know some people do think that. I don't know if Dak can be, a better QB pick than, say, Justin Jefferson is a wide receiver pick or Breece Hall, even in this format. It gets to be tricky. I've definitely taken Dak. I've taken some Purdy, but only more at the 2-3 turn. I could not take Purdy over Bijan, whether I had a first-round quarterback or not. I think that's tricky. Jaden Daniels is the other one that I've taken a lot in the second round for obvious reasons. We've talked a lot about him. Oh, I told you guys we looked at my exposures on the last draft. Let's see. Where do I get my completed? We looked at my exposures. My Daniels exposure was low. I told you I had some drafts going that he was in. It's now up to 11%. It was super low. I was God, I got to get more Daniels. It just a couple drafts ended and he was in all of them, and it shot him up to 11% from my early drafts. Although the entry fees number is low because I've been taking him more, I guess, in puppies, sharper drafters in the BBMs and stuff in my first batch, where I didn't get Daniels in those drafts as frequently. But yeah, I just wanted to prove that I wasn't lying when I said that I had more Daniels incoming, because I also have, if you go to my active, another team that just I filled up yesterday. And this is another Daniels team that's going to come in, but is not hitting my exposures yet. This is a Daniels, Brian Robinson, Jahan Dotson, Luke McCaffrey. I got Drake London, Rondell Moore, and Kyle Pitts coming back. This is a Washington-Atlanta super stack week 17 thing. And I think that's another puppy, but it's another one where I did have another Daniels active that's now done. I've finished my 18th round pick in that draft, but it hasn't finished yet, so it hasn't hit my exposures yet. Anyway, I gotta prove my claims when I just make these claims that I don't have very much Jaden Daniels, but I'm telling you that I do. I got to show you that was actually true. That number that's up to 11% is probably going to be closer to 15% after that first round of drafts ends. And I've also taken a lot of him in these super flexes, which is a different exposure tab, but also those aren't done yet. All right. Jumping back into the draft that we were just talking about. Tyreek Hill, Joe Burrow at the turn. This is a super flex draft. Chris Olave. I took Devon Achane early 4th round. Travis Kelce late 5th round. So I've been painting it different colors here a little bit. I do have 2 really good receivers in Tyreek Hill and Olave. I take Achane with Tyreek, do a little bit of a Miami thing where it's those 2 guys that it's really concentrated on. I don't necessarily love that, but I don't hate it either. I have all these Cincinnati guys starred. The Denver guys starred. That's my Burrow stuff that I got to make sure to get factored in. T. Higgins is one. This kind of sucks because Malik Neighbors is still there at 602. But I don't have Chase and I have Burrow, and I would really like to get Higgins. I could do Jermaine Burton. I could do like late tight ends. I could even do like Chase Brown. And be like, yeah, Burrow's going to throw TDs to those guys. But I really wanted to get Higgins onto this team. And with a 70 ADP and I'm at pick 62 and I'm at the turn, I'm at 602. I don't think he comes all the way back to 711. And yet I don't think I can justify just for the stack taking Higgins over Malik Neighbors. There's not a running back I would take here. There's not a tight end. I already have taken Kelce at a big ADP discount. This is a wide receiver room. When I see Neighbors 8 picks past ADP, where if I can talk myself into a room where Higgins at an ADP of 71 in this format, falls to 83, 12 picks past ADP, this might be that room because it doesn't seem to be a room that is hammering receiver. There's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ahead of him, but I would be taking one of those. It's one of those things where, like, if I pushed Neighbors past this pick, it increases the likelihood of Higgins coming back. If I take Neighbors, it decreases the likelihood. This is a tricky spot. And I only have Burrow as well, and it's been a QB-heavy draft, but I'm not going to take one at 62 just to fill a QB2 spot. I am going to take Neighbors. It's not correlated, but also because I'm not going to be strong at QB2. I need the upside swing of Neighbors. T. Higgins is a fun correlated bet, but I'll take Jermaine Burton later if I have to. This is a really good value on Neighbors. I mentioned this in the Superflex. He falls. His ADP is low already for some reason, and then he falls into tiers that he's not in the regular BBM drafts. I have a lot of Neighbors in the Superflex contest. If you guys are doing Superflex, keep an eye out for the Neighbors value. He's a lot of times like buried, and you're like, wait, Malik Neighbors is still here? Like, oh man, I gotta make sure I go take him. Here's the other one that I starred where I already had Malik Neighbors and I talked through it. I got on the clock just now. So we'll do this one as well. It's the Anthony Richardson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Drake London, Malik Neighbors, Stephon Diggs team. Derek Carr just went 1 pick ahead of me. He would have been a nice QB2 with some stability. He's sort of the last really stable QB2, other than I think Bo Nix. I think Nix has a much better case for starting 17 games than JJ McCarthy or Drake May. And then Daniel Jones has the contract stuff. So maybe that Carr pick is kind of a snipe too, because he has a different buy than Richardson, but Nix matches Richardson's week 14 buy. See, I don't think I have to take Richardson here, but I'm a little bit concerned about, I don't think I have to take Nix, but I'm a little bit concerned about Richardson as my 1 anchor QB. I think I'd be less concerned about having the 1 anchor QB if it was more of a drop back passer. If it was a Mahomes or something, obviously Richardson got banged up multiple ways in 4 games last year. I love the receivers here. Definitely don't want to give back any of the value that I've already gained. Michael Pittman is the top of the ADP value and is a stack option with Richardson. That would seem to be a pretty straightforward pick. And you got the bring back with Neighbors. However, I just think Michael Pittman is so pretty egregiously overpriced. It even like the Richardson value doesn't have to be through his passing. In fact, it's largely not. It's largely through his rushing ability. You have Kincaid and Andrews here as options that I probably just prefer straight up to get a tight end in this build. Tank Dell is the other one that I would prefer, but I do have Diggs and no Stroud, so it's not like I need to like force a Tank Dell pick onto this build. Andrews would be a bring back on Diggs. Excuse me, I was kind of yawning there. Man, I'd kind of like to take Drake May as well and just make a bet on this team on New England, but he also has the Week 14 bye. So it could be Daniel Jones with Malik Neighbors. I do think it's a little bit overstated that like he's definitely going to get benched for the injury guarantee stuff. There's a possibility they're just playing good football late in the year. Oh, he's a bring back on Richardson, which for Week 17, if they're both in that game, they both got some rushing production. It could shoot that game out, and you could get both quarterback scores. Different buy. Yeah, rather than go tight end here, because I think there's a possibility like a Pitts comes back around at the next spot. I don't really need to throw a fifth receiver into this build because I can play those receivers at Superflex. It's good to have that firepower. But I don't know that I need to go Pittman here just to stack it up from like a draft capital and allocation perspective. I could go with one of these running backs maybe, but I'm going to go to Daniel Jones here for a little bit of correlation, a little bit of QB2. I think Jones is going to play most of the year. That's the right pick, I think. It's not ideal, but in terms, so this is an example of like we're kind of in that QB dead zone I was talking about. But the opportunity cost, I'm pretty low on Pittman, obviously, right? The running backs aren't great picks. The tight ends are a significant opportunity cost, but not one that I'm like gonna hate myself over. Receiver, there's some opportunity cost as well still with Michael Pittman, Tank Dell. I mean, even T. Higgins before it hits that break where Amari Cooper and George Pickens to me are a different tier. But I talked about having Diggs already, and I could just make a directional bet on the Texans, obviously, and take both Diggs and Dell, and that wouldn't be an issue. But I didn't really want to at their costs without Stroud. I'm trying to decide as I continue to look at this, even though I've already made the pick and taken Daniel Jones, if I just sort of broke my own rule and the opportunity cost was too high and I should have kept pushing QB. I think there's a strong case for that as well. But with Neighbors on this team, with Richardson as not a like super stable QB1, and with the opportunity cost tier not being clear, it's not like Cooper Kupp went a little bit ago. I took Diggs at 508. It's not like I just, bypassed the Diggs pick. Devonta Smith or something. Zay Flowers went in that range. That's interesting. That's the one I starred that I really liked, but now I'm questioning a little bit. All right, before we jump into Eliminator, I'm gonna hit some of you guys' questions. What is my thought on Bijan over Breece? I really got to get timestamps on the video so I can do a better job of pointing you guys different directions. But I talked a ton about this on one of the early videos. I want to say it was the second video. But yeah, we've already been over this one a bunch. It's a good question, but basically I think that Bijan has a better shot to consolidate snaps. I think they're both really good, but that the Rams system that's coming over with Zach Robinson, really 11 personnel heavy. They don't want their opponents to substitute, and Bijan might be able to consolidate work and play every down. It seems like Breece is going to give up some work. They took 2 more backups this year. Braylon Allen is getting all this buzz already in camp. They play slower, and so they don't mind substituting. Like Aaron Rodgers likes to do a lot of stuff at the line. I think Breece is going to be really good. Aaron Rodgers is going to throw him some touchdowns. He's going to catch a lot of stuff as well as be an explosive runner. He's good, but I think Bijan has the better, like, legendary upside volume profile this year. We got Andrew Hahn saying, posted a question, but for some reason it's different than the chat. I'm new here. It's got a red bar next to it. Any advice? I don't know an answer to that. If any of you guys know that have commented a lot, help our guy Andrew out. Yeah, you guys were all saying nice snipe. This was earlier. They took Pickens over Zay, so they deserve the snipe. I like that take. How many drafts am I doing at once? I'm in 40 new ones, and then there's still some other ones that are finishing up from the first batch. That was 45. People aren't realizing you can play the 4th wide receiver at Superflex. Again, this goes back to the point about being able to hammer wide receiver in some of these Superflex builds. 0 QB is a way to go if you miss out on an elite QB. It is, and it isn't. I think, like, the Superflex element, I think people do push QB too much, and they get too weak at QB sometimes. I don't think you can be so weak that you don't have a starter, right? Like you do, like, Superflex isn't. You need 1 QB still. It still has. It's not a no QB format, right? Like, so 0 QB. If you're thinking about it like 0 RB, like, you could still hit on like a Derek Carr or a Bo Nix, and call that 0 QB because you waited like 5 rounds to go get that guy, whoever it was. But yeah, I wouldn't go. You still have to probably do that in like the 7th round in some of these drafts. I wouldn't go to like the 10th round, have like Justin Fields as my QB1. Like, yeah, that team's probably dead at that point. Like, there is an element with the scarcity that you have to respect. And I think you can go too far the other direction. Oh, historical anomalies. You mush Zverev. Did he lose? He's now down 3-1 on the 5th set. I actually care about this tennis matchup that I'm sure a lot of people don't. I'm going to go look it up. Tennis men. They are in the 5th set. It's 3-2 now. Who's serving? Alcaraz is serving. So he's going to go to 4-2 if he wins. If he holds serve, it's over. We need Zverev to break. All right. Consigliere, best balls, the best for receipts. Not stacking Anthony Richardson makes sense, but you need Neighbors for Daniel Jones to keep his job all year. Yep, had Neighbors on that team. I do think that's a good take. That I have a hard time with the Daniel Jones. Earlier, I think I showed a team on here. Maybe I was looking at it on my own earlier. Can't totally remember, but it only had Wan'Dale Robinson, and it made it trickier if you don't have Neighbors. Like, that's just like, if it's not Neighbors that's elevating this pass offense, then it's just last year's problems, you know. So if Neighbors is elevating it, then yeah, then I'm a little bit in on Daniel Jones, but that comes with Neighbors. Like, you want to have Neighbors on those builds. What's your favorite build in Superflex? Sean wrote about Stars and Scrubs for FFPC, but people overdraft QBs on Underdog, so it's easy to get boxed out of QB. Yeah, so people are overdrafting QBs now a little bit relative to what I was talking about on my first ever draft. I'll show you guys that one because it's just so crazy. Superflex season. There's 4 teams here. It's the one where I took 5 QBs in the end. This was like the first one I did. I'm out of the 101. I take Josh Allen, Drake London, and Jaden Daniels, 2-3. Malik Neighbors and Dalton Kincaid, 4-5. I take Daniels because of the value there, but I'm still only going 2 QBs. You take Allen 101. At the 6-7 turn, Kittle and McLaurin. I get my 2 elite tight ends. I have McLaurin stacked up with Neighbors and Drake London. It's a 3-receiver, 2 elite tight end build at this point. And then at 8-9, at 96 and 97, Derek Carr and Daniel Jones are still floating around. Nobody takes a receiver in the whole a quarterback in the whole 7th round. Only 2 go in the 8th round. It's J.J. McCarthy and Will Levis. Confusing for me why Derek Carr is still there at that time. I don't think I needed to take Daniel Jones's before me understanding the injury clause in his contract and being a little bit more concerned, or maybe it was after. But when you think about him in Superflex, he actually makes a lot of sense because you have 4 quarterbacks, right? Like you don't need him to play 17 games. He can be a really big piece of a best ball build. And so, like, one thing I would say is, like, even if Josh Allen and Jaden Daniels are great, they're going to have some down games. And these guys are going to provide some value. There's also some contingency value here because quarterbacks do get injured. They miss time. Like about 50 quarterbacks start a game in the NFL every year. So about 18 more than there are teams. Some of that is because some teams start 4 or 5. It doesn't mean there's 18 teams that start multiple quarterbacks. But like half the league's quarterbacks or a little bit more start all of their team's games. And then a little bit less than half of the other teams are going to start another quarterback at some point. Sometimes that's just a couple weeks because the quarterback hurts his shoulder or gets an AC sprain or whatever. Gets a rib injury or something like that. And then there's also like the benchings and things like that. Like Daniel Jones can provide some value here. Anyway, 120, 121, I take my first 2 running backs, Javonte Williams and Devin Singletary. I take Singletary in part because I have Daniel Jones. It starts to do a little Giants thing. And then Bo Nix makes it all the way to 144 in this room. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to take a 5th quarterback. Like, it's not that I was like trying to not leave the value for anyone else. It's like, even though quarterbacks have a high floor, they still have spike weeks where they stack touchdowns. And I can treat this like a running back room now where I have to start 2 and I have a high floor, but I want different spikes to really elevate my QB scoring. I would suggest that this team is really likely to advance because it's going to have really high QB scoring and didn't have to sacrifice too much to get it. It still has 2 elite tight ends. It still has London and Neighbors. The McLaurin pick, I don't really love the McLaurin upside, and I took it just for stack purposes. Maybe kind of regret that, like taking it over Keenan Allen just for stack purposes is a little bit, my wide receiver 3 is not amazing. I do, after Knicks, I take Chase Brown and Marvin Mims. I take Ray Davis and Troy Franklin. So I get Knicks stacked up with both Mims and Franklin. I have Chase Brown as a bring back. Wan'Dale Robinson adds to the Giants thing, which, I also had Neighbors. That was part of the reason I also took the Daniel Jones value at 97. But I bring Wan'Dale Robinson into the build. I bring Rondale Moore into the build. He's a bring back on Jaden Daniels. And then Elijah Mitchell and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the last 2. The running back room on this team is pretty weak, but it winds up being a 5-6-7-2 build. I get the 5 QBs. 6 running backs is not probably enough when, the last 2 are just like tack-ons, Elijah Mitchell and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But if I take it some zeros at running back, like I think the quarterback scoring can float, and the 2 elite tight ends. I think the bigger issue is, do I have enough firepower at receiver? Drake London, Neighbors, Terry McLaurin, Mims, Franklin, Wan'Dale, and Moore are all stacked. Intriguing pieces that are stacked, but we'll see how this team works out. But I did. So in terms of what's my favorite build, when I get QB values and I can do this without sacrificing too much skill position upside, probably if I went back on this, by the way, I would probably not do double elite tight end. I didn't realize I'd be taking quarterbacks in 8, 9, and 12. I probably would have just went 1 elite tight end because I would have wanted to get another receiver in that range, or maybe a better running RB1, like a Travis Etienne or something. James Cook to pair with Josh Allen at the 6-7 turn instead of Kittle would have been a good pick. But this build still, as long as I didn't have to give up too much to get the wide receiver depth, like that's my favorite thing. I think in best ball, like it's underrated how wide receivers, like Because like one thing you could say to that is you have 5 QBs, only 2 can hit your lineup. It's like, yeah, there's bye weeks, and there are QB injuries, there's benchings, there's poor play, there's bad games. Like that's going to elevate my scoring to have a best ball. Even though QBs have a high floor, I'm going to have like 2 spike games almost every week at quarterback. Hopefully the majority of that is Josh Allen and Jaden Daniels. But if Jaden Daniels misses a little time or he's, struggles or whatever, then I get a low-owned Jaden Daniels through. That's one way that can play out. There's a lot of ways things can play out. But if, Derek Carr and Daniel Jones and Bo Nix basically just serve to get me a low-owned Jaden Daniels through, and maybe even a low-owned Josh Allen if he has a tough year or misses some time, then I can potentially go into the playoffs. I was going to call it a shootout, whatever, the final 3 weeks with Allen and Daniels and a really unique quarterback build. Again, will I have enough firepower at running back, receiver, and tight end is the question. I think I got close enough there. So that's my favorite build. Sean's are a little bit more risky, the stars and scrubs type idea of taking like maybe one elite QB and then waiting really long, but they can hit in such a huge way. That's very much Sean's MO, is like I'm really just seeking to like dominate the draft to end up having this like really high upside build. I guess part of me is like, because of the pod variants and stuff, I don't necessarily like, you're not guaranteed even if you build this perfect team to get that team through, right? You could just run into some bad pod luck. So I kind of want to I want to shoot for ceiling in my builds, but I kind of want to do a little bit more conservative over more drafts rather than risking getting boxed out like this comment calls it, but having the potential to have this absolutely elite build, like really high ceiling build, which isn't to say that Sean does it wrong. Sean does a really good job of executing some strategies that are, I think, harder for other people to replicate, including myself, frankly. I don't think he's doing it wrong, but I don't think it's the optimal way for me to draft necessarily. But I think that is another one of my favorite build types, an elite QB with a lot of other elite players, and then coming back and feeling good about the QB2 and QB3. Like if I can then hit Bo Nix and something, like, because Bo Nix my favorite later on quarterback probably. If I can hit Bo Nix and something at good prices and still get to like 3 QBs. But again, the way I was talking through the Superflex stuff, even 3 QBs, that means on all 3 of their bye weeks, you only have the 2 QBs active. You have to take their scores, or you could get some help at the Superflex, right? But you ideally are using their scores because they do have a higher bar for scoring at the quarterback position. And if you match buys, or if somebody misses any time or anything, you're down to 1 quarterback for some of those weeks. And that does impact your scoring over the course of a season. I do think optimally in best ball, you would want 4 starters if you could have 4. Like it's a running back room where you're like, okay, I have multiple outs to both starting spots, and I can, if somebody has a bad week or whatever, I can swallow that. Now, the Superflex element, it's not 2 QB. The Superflex element does support the thinner QB rooms. But even when I talk about this build where it's a star QB build with 2 later QBs and it's 3 QBs, for me, as an analyst, the way that I think I differ a little bit than other analysts is I think that's still a little bit thin. Even if I have 3 QBs I feel very comfortable with, I'm like, that's going to cost me some QB points over the course of the season on some bye weeks or whatever, where if I had 4, it also just gives you more chance for those 3 touchdown games or the high pass volume games where the guy throws for 300 yards, or the rush, if it's Daniel Jones, the games where he has 80 rushing yards, the spike games, which do kind of come out of nowhere at quarterback. We think about like DFS and the weeks when, the winning million maker quarterback is whatever. There was that season where Mitch Trubisky was a winning million maker quarterback like 3 times and no one was playing him anytime because every other game he was horrible and no one thought he could, have another spike game like that. Daniel Jones has been similar in his better seasons. He's just had multiple spike games, basically. He's going to have bad games too, floor games. Derek Carr is going to have games where he spikes touchdowns and pass volume. Jaden Daniels is going to have games where he runs for a lot. He's going to have games where he only runs for like 30 yards and doesn't run for a TD. And that adds a little bit of a floor, but like if the passing volume's not there, then he ends up with like 13 fantasy points or 11. And those weeks, if I can get a 25-point game out of Derek Carr, it's adding something to my ledger. Like it's adding a 12-point boost. So anyway, the way all that comes together is really intriguing to think about. My favorite build type, the biggest thing I would say is there's 4 different positions that are all very important. And I do like to use 0 RB in this format because I want to use my high-end draft capital at quarterback a decent amount of the time. And I already want to be using it at receiver, and I already want to be using it for elite tight ends. And so running back's a position where for me, I'm comfortable pushing. I'm very comfortable with 0 RB as it is. And so my favorite build is to do, especially like in Superflex, I get more interested in 0 RB is the point that I'm trying to make. But yeah, part of my favorite build answer is it's dependent on the room, and I want to be taking value. Whatever the room is going heavy on, I want to be going light on. It's a QB heavy room that I'm probably going to be trying Sean's strategy. If it's a QB light room, I'm probably going to get QB depth and try to play what I was just talking about with like 4 starters or 5. If you're going to let me have, I don't want to take 5 because I did lose a little bit of the depth. The middle of my wide receiver build, not strong. Middle of my running back build, or it was a 0 RB build, but it wasn't like a very strong 0 RB build. The 2 tight ends are going to help that. And again, I only have to start 2 receivers because I'm going to super flex a QB. And the flex could even be helped by like the 2 elite tight ends on that team. Anyway, there's a lot of paths to get there in Superflex. I really enjoy that element of it. So you got to let the room dictate. I do think value, and I think being flexible in your builds is one of the smart ways to do it. But I like when the room falls in a way where I can get adequate QB depth and feel good about that. Yeah. Kitmo puts this really well. The Bijan Brees comment, the tiebreaker is Bijan doesn't have a donkey offensive coordinator. I mean, Nathaniel Hackett is a concern. Dylan says Sean's FFPC approach a little more optimal on FFPC than UD because the QB scoring is suppressed versus 1 QB formats. But ADPs don't factor that in for UD. Probably lean more to Ben's approach. Yeah, good point here. FFPC, like I was trying to think through that as I was talking. Whether the QBs actually score, like some of the scoring formats, the QB is like a bad QB game is a good skill position game, which changes the Superflex math, right? In some of them, like FFPC, as Dylan's talking about here, a mediocre QB game is relative to a pretty good skill position player game or whatever, which means you don't have to have the QB in the Superflex. A spike game from one of your other positions will hit your Superflex, but the scoring format for the quarterback is going to dictate that in a lot of cases. Like if it's easy to get a 30-point game out of your quarterback on a format, we were just talking about for UD, like the top guys were about 25 points per game in that one season. That's not the highest quarterback format you're going to see. That's definitely lower than some. I'm trying to see UD versus FFPC direct. I mean, FFPC is actually, I think, a little bit higher scoring. When I look at like last year, they do 1 point for every 20 pass yards, 4 points per TD. Underdog does 1 for every 25. Try to do math. I think that's right. I think Underdog actually is a little bit lighter, but it's also I think part of Dylan's point here is it's also half point PPR. So the scale for and it's and FFPC is tight end premium even. So the scale for like tight ends is higher. The scale for all the positions is higher with the full point PPR. On Underdog, at wide receiver and running back, you'll have a lot of weeks where like your running back hits your lineup with like 10 points, and that's like solid. 15 points is definitely good. In full PPR, you want to be like 15's like less good. That 10 to 15 range is certainly a better outcome in half point PPR than in full PPR, which again, that's the range we're talking about that like is kind of the low end for any starting quarterback. All right, let's go on to the Eliminator stuff. Actually, we got to spin the wheel. We haven't spun the wheel. I got to do the. I'm enjoying these wheel of names randomizer spins that we've been doing, because they're helping me think through stuff for my projections, which are going to be coming out soon. So for those of you who don't know, whatever team this lands on, we want to think back to past, usually Los Angeles Rams. My immediate thought. You guys told me I gotta be more patient than talking while that's spinning, because I start to Dylan adds for FFPC, the Superflex scoring is different than the 1 QB scoring. I don't think I recognize that. So they actually make it 1 point for 25 yards, and they make it a -2 for an interception versus a -1, which changes the touchdown to interception ratio math a little bit. So interesting that they knock QB scoring down a little bit. I was talking while that was spinning, and you guys have told me that when it spins, my mic kind of cuts out because the audio from the website. But we spin the Rams. We remember some guys, old, maybe fantasy stars, other players. The first name that comes to mind for me is Oz Hakeem, the greatest show on turf. Obviously, Marshall Faulk, Torrey Holt, Isaac Bruce, Kurt Warner. Everyone remembers Oz Hakeem's the other guy that everyone kind of probably remembers too, though. Man, after the Marshall Faulk years, they had Mark Bolger, and then they had Steven Jackson for a long time. Was an incredible fantasy wide receiver. I was playing PPR already at that time. He would catch a ton of balls. Big, physical back that also caught a lot of balls. They had some really thin years where he didn't get the touchdowns, so he wasn't as good. But the years where they were better and his touchdowns came together with the receiving, like he's one of those high-value touch guys. You love the backs with size that can also catch, play every down. It's like that's the David Johnson profile. That's the, Christian McCaffrey's not huge, but like that, it doesn't matter. Like the receiving plus the goal line work is the profile, and so having size and catching, you get the goal line work with it. Really fun Rams years in there. They had that one great Brandon Lloyd season. Talk about remember some guy. Brandon Lloyd was the overall wide receiver 1 for them for 1 year, right? He had was it them that he had his best year? Oh no, it was Denver when he had his best year. Then he went to the Rams and wasn't even very good for the Rams. So I've got this backwards. It's the year prior. He got in-season traded the next year to the Rams from Denver. Ricky Prohl was a kind of a depth guy on those teams. Who are the other running backs? We talked about Drunk Candidate on the last one when we had Washington. He was drafted by the Rams, but there's some other dudes between Steven Jackson and Todd Gurley for the Rams. Some running backs that were interesting. CJ Anderson, the legendary playoff run. Towards the later part of Todd Gurley's run. Steven Jackson, we were just talking about him. I'm going to try to figure out, between Jackson and Gurley, you had Zach Stacy. Is Zach Stacy the one is that an RIP? Oh, God. No, he Sorry. I think he was arrested, but I knew something happened with him. Who am I thinking of? There's a running back from that era that kind of tragically passed away, but and now I'm just turning this into a somber direction. Who are some other remember-some guys? Lawrence Phillips. Yeah, I mean, you could go way back with the Rams. Trey Mason was their leading rusher in 1 year between Jackson and Todd Gurley. Kenny Britt. Danny Amendola in the Sam Bradford years. I'm actually looking at this now. Yeah, Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt, those guys were legends. All right. There's not as many fun players from this team as I thought in terms of remember some guys. I mean, I think it's because Falk was the dude for so long, then Jackson was the dude for so long, then Gurley was the dude for so long. You go look at their leading rushers by season from 1999 to 2019. Falk, Jackson, and Gurley were their leading rusher for all but two of those seasons, the Zach Stacy and Trey Mason seasons in between Jackson and Gurley. But Falk was for 6 straight years, then Jackson was for 8 straight years, and then the back end, Gurley was for 5 straight years. Torrey Holt was their top receiver for a huge chunk of that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years in a row. Jared Cook was their top receiver 1 year. He had a little bit of his early career run, or I guess mid-career run as a tight end. Some of his first solid seasons while he was with the Rams. That's enough to remember some guys for the Rams. But what I want to do is talk about the Rams this year because, number one, they're a fun team to talk about. But number two, that's sort of the idea of spinning the wheel. Last year, 2 years ago, they really fell apart. You have all the injuries and everything. Last year, nobody wants to buy into them because they think that Matthew Stafford is, too fragile. And if he gets hurt, what happens? So 2 years ago, Matthew Stafford only plays 9 games. Cooper Kupp only plays 9 games. And it becomes kind of a disaster down the stretch. They play some John Wolford. They end up bringing in Baker Mayfield and playing him a little bit late in that year. Sean McVay contemplates retirement in the offseason. They talked about this on some podcasts, but it was a really tough year in the building for a lot of people. Come back last season, and everyone's really down on their whole build. Too fragile, not enough infrastructure there. Stafford has a pretty solid year. Doesn't actually play the whole season. We get a little Carson Wentz. Cooper Kupp banged up again as well. But Puka Nacua and Kyren Williams become that infrastructure and have this great season. Cam Akers is actually there in week 1 and is the starter in week 1 and then is deactivated by week 2. He only plays 1 game with the Rams. He winds up getting traded, obviously, later in the year. Then when Kyren goes down, and Kyren did go to IR, we get the Royce Freeman, Darrell Henderson stretch at running back. But otherwise, Kyren, one of the really big stories of this team is Kyren's snap shares, the way that they consolidate volume. I was talking about this a little bit ago. But running backs don't play 100% of the snaps. I'm going to zoom right here. This is Kyren's game log. You see the snap shares. He played 65% in week 1 when Cam Akers actually started, then 95% the next game, 100%. 72, 84, 82. Then he gets hurt for 4 games, comes back to only 61% in his first game back. But then right away, the second game back, 94%, 90, 77, 79, and then 94%. In the playoffs, he only played 66% of the snaps. A little bit interesting there in a loss at a close game. And I know that they've talked about wanting to use him less. I see the Blake Corum pick as they needed depth. Like the Cam Akers is gone. And when Kyren was out for those 4 games midseason, they had nothing. They were going to bring something in. And then the second thing I see is for Kyren, yes, the huge snap share is a big part of why he was so good, but he has room to come down from these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games in the 90s in only 12 total games played, or I guess 13 if you count the postseason. He can be in the 80s or the high 70s. I mean, he could even be at 65% and still have effective games. You go back to his week 1 game, he had 2 touchdowns in that game. There's still a lot of good usage for Rams running backs, like in the red zone and just how they're used, that would make him still a valuable play. He had the 61% in his first game back. He got 16 carries, caught 6 passes, and scored 2 receiving touchdowns. That was one of his season-high receiving games on only 61% snaps. The playoff game where he only played 66, he only had 14 touches total in that one, no touchdowns. It wasn't a huge fantasy day. But I do think Kyren's more insulated than people do. He really lost value when Corum was drafted. Like I said, I expected that. I wrote about that. We've talked about this a little bit on the streams, but I had that in the newsletter prior to the year that I wasn't taking Kyren at the 1-2 turn when he was going really high in the pre-draft stuff, the big board and all that, because I felt that they were going to bring someone in and probably the market would respond, and it did, but I don't think it responded correctly. And so now when we looked at my exposures, I'm pretty exposed to Kyren because I think him falling into the 3rd round is pretty silly when he was as good as he was when active last year. If you look at him in terms of points per game, he more or less was a legendary upside kind of running back last year. His points per game are behind McCaffrey, but in half PPR, McCaffrey was 22.6 and Kyren was 20.1. And even Raheem Mostert was only at 17.1. And that's the guy who led the NFL in touchdowns with 21 TDs in only 15 games. In full PPR, Kyren was up at 21.4. That's not like the elite, a legendary ceiling. But again, he wasn't even the starter in week 1, right? In week 3, he had kind of a down game. Week 5, he had kind of a down game. You look at him, like after he's really the guy, and he has a really good stretch from weeks 12 to 17 down the stretch. His lowest point total was 14.3 in PPR, and he had 2 30-point games. On the season, he had 3 more 25-point games, 5 25-plus PPR games. Again, not much in the wild card round, which is a little bit concerning in a must-win game in terms of, my idea that they really want Kyren to be their guy. But I think overall, you have to be pretty confident in him. And then if what I was saying is true in terms of the usage and they're going to potentially consolidate snaps like that, Blake Corum to me becomes a pretty intriguing handcuff. The Sean McVay system has had a lot of really good, productive running backs. We've talked about why. They play a lot of downs. They get a lot of red zone usage. The touchdowns consolidate to the running backs. And so, yeah, I think Blake Corum is a really intriguing handcuff. I'm thinking of more of a handcuff than a big-time standalone value guy. Because, again, McVay's never really done a 1-2 punch. It's always kind of been one dude. I think they'll use Corum, especially early. But I think if he's not doing great mid-season, you might just see it kind of shift back to heavy Kyren games. It'll be a little fluid. But then if Kyren gets banged up, I think Corum plays quite a bit. So you have some really interesting upside scenarios. Benjamin Mason's, he's hoping Kyren continues to fall. He has a few 4th-round shares. Absolutely loves it. Mac Nova says Rams, McVay, running backs, one of those positions you want to take shots on. Yeah, those are. I mean, if you can get 4th-round shares, yes, absolutely. I would love that too. And Mac Nova puts that really well. This is a positional situation you want to take shots on. The other main thing that I would say for the Rams, the Puka Nacua consolidation of volume. I should have done a better job of seeing that coming last year, but it relates to the 11 personnel and keeping these guys on the field, not wanting to substitute, so the defense can't match substitutions. We've talked about this on like every stream so far. And so it makes a lot of sense that somebody was able to step into that much volume if they were really good. As far as what Puka Nacua is, like I get a lot of I see a lot of comments that are like, this is the best rookie season of all time. And I think Puka Nacua is incredibly good, and we do need to acknowledge that. And I think he's in a great spot again next year. But the guy that Sean was comparing him to in season was Anquan Boldin, and I've loved this comparison ever since. And I've noted that he made the initial comparison, but it's one I want to talk about any chance I get with Puka, because Anquan Boldin went on to have a really great career. Very similarly, in his rookie season in an Arizona team that was, bereft of other options, basically. I think I used the word bereft correctly there. They went 4-12. They threw a ton, and they didn't have Larry Fitzgerald yet. They brought in Larry Fitzgerald the next year. It's kind of comparable, to Cooper Kupp being banged up all of last year and then now maybe being healthy, but we'll see about that. The next year they bring in Fitzgerald, so they have both of them the next season. But Bolden only played 10 games the next season. His volume per game was still very strong, still over 10 targets per game in year 2, over 10 targets per game in year 3. He leads the NFL in yards per game receiving in year 3. This is his other great season, 102 catches, 1,400 yards. It's actually his best season, year 3 here. It's his best season by targets. It's his best season by yards, by receptions. And it's a very similar iteration of the Arizona offense that he was able to have the great season in year 1. The point that I'm making is we do know, and this is the very first stream we did, I talked a little bit about this idea of normal distribution curves, and we joked in the chat that it was a stats, I was turning it into a stats, a stats lesson. But normal distribution curves, there's only X amount of in a sample, there's only X amount of, I'm a little bit hungover, and I'm trying to figure out how I want to articulate this, or even how to articulate it. My brain's not doing a great job, because I don't want to make it too stats heavy, but you expect some data points to not be right at their 50th percentile outcome is the sort of the simplest way of putting it. We would expect in a league full of NFL players, some players run hot and some players run cold. And it's not like we're pattern matching or like overfitting to say that somebody ran hot. There should be players like that in a normal distribution. I think what's wrong is assuming that everyone's at like their 50th percentile, and then that like progression comes naturally from that. So the whole point that I'm trying to make here on Puka, he had such a great rookie season, and people say, well, what's he going to do in year 2? He was already that great in year 1. He's about to do the greatest, wide receiver season of all time. I don't think you can take what he did last year and then go, oh, I'm going to bump it 20%, because year 2 receivers that are good get, X percent, whatever it is, 20% better in year 2. He already was at an 80th percentile outcome or something like that. And that's what I think is so intriguing about the Anquan Boldin comp, is that he came into an Arizona offense at that time that allowed him to hit a statistical ceiling. He went on to have great years, multiple other 80 catch seasons, 1, 2, 3, 4, at ages 28 and 29, and then 2 more in San Francisco at ages 33 and 34. He has 80 plus catches in those seasons. And actually at age 26 in Arizona, he has an 80 catch season. But that year 1 winds up being, one of his top 3 all-time seasons, basically. That age 33 season's probably the other, probably the other great one. Year 3 is the best one. And so that's the thing where, like, if you're pro Puka, and year 2, Anquan Boldin was very good, but some of his efficiency did fall in year 2. His yards per game fell, his receptions per game fell, but the volume was still there. I expect the volume to still be there for Puka. I expect him to continue to be good, but for like dynasty and stuff, I don't think he's going to be the greatest receiver of all time, basically. I think it's really easy to look at the Rams offense last year and be like, he was elevated by the situation, which includes the type of offense and scheme that they run, which they're running again this year. And then Cooper Kupp being banged up, and there not being a lot of competition and a lot of other stability in the passing game. And so a lot of that fell onto Puka once they got something with him, and it worked in week 1 in such a big way, 15 targets or whatever it was. I wrote about this in Signals. It's like, he's going to get all the volume he can handle from here on out. Like, you should bid in your free agent bidding as much as you can, basically, on Puka. I did that in a bunch of leagues with Sean. We bid like 90% of our budget on, more than 90% of our budget on some of our teams. Remember, he was the top ad and the top, signal in my Stealing Signals newsletter after week 1. And then Kyren was the number 2. Those two guys were ones that, based on the way this offense operates, once I saw week 1, I was like, you got to be on these guys. You got to go at them aggressively. They are huge pickups. Having said that, that was because I knew it didn't even matter how great Puka was. He was going to get elevated by the situation. They needed to lean into what he was with Kupp banged up. And they did, and he's good. He obviously added to it, like Anquan Boldin was good and added to it early in his career. And Anquan Boldin goes on to be an 800-plus receiving yard guy basically every year of his career, and then peaks at times. And this is in an era where there was less passing. And like these Baltimore teams, 2010 to 2012, not a heavy passing volume teams. He plays in San Francisco during like the Kaepernick era and the Jim Harbaugh era, if I'm not mistaken, which again, not as much passing necessarily. But he's good. He's always good, even despite some of the lesser situations he plays in. But the statistical peak really happens for him in these first 3-4 years of his career. And it's not that he got worse or anything. It's that the situation there was better than the 50th percentile outcome for an average player to get the best statistics out of the play that they put out there. And then it became lower than the 50th percentile at other points in his career. I feel like Anquan Boldin was who he was for most of his career. Very stable, consistent player. But you see how, he has some peak seasons because of the situation around him. That third season was the one where the Cardinals were so good with Kurt Warner that, they were 5-11 that year. I lied. It must have been the fourth season. No, the fifth season. Is this the one? Yeah, this is the one where they actually only went 9-7. But they make the run to the Super Bowl was the point I was going to make. Which there's obviously not a point there because that was 2008. He had 11 touchdowns. That's where he peaked on the scoring side in a year where they were a little bit better. Only played 12 games, 11 TDs in 12 games. Anyway, the point is, I think Puka can be very, very good again this year. I like him. I want to be on him, and I'm going to be on him. I'm going to draft him. I do think if Cooper Kupp, so one of the issues with Cooper Kupp is just the raw numbers. He misses some games. He plays hurt in other games. But as a result, he gets 95 targets, 737 yards, 5 touchdowns. The other guys in this offense, Tyler Higbee runs a lot of routes because, again, they consolidate stuff. He gets 70 targets, 500 receiving yards. He's not good or anything. But there's going to be some receiving for the tight end, whoever's out there. Tutu Atwell has a nice season, but then Demarcus Robinson kind of takes over that late. That role could be phased out a little bit more if Kupp needs to take on more volume, and that doesn't have to come directly from Puka. But the point I'm trying to drive home is, if Kupp is healthy enough to play most of the season, he's not going to be a 737-yard guy, right? He's going to be a 1,000-yard season guy if he plays for most of the year. I don't know if he'll be up around Puka Nacua's 1,486 yards, 160 targets, but obviously Cooper Kupp, the last time he played a full season, was that guy. He had a 1,900-yard receiving season with 190 targets, and then the last 2 years since then, he's been banged up. But if you combine those seasons, it's a similar targets per game figure. Last year it was a little bit lower, but he's played 21 games over the last 2 regular seasons, 193 targets, a little bit less than 10 targets per game. It's not quite on the same scale as what he did in that 2021 season in terms of volume per game, but it's not way, way worse. And so, yeah, if Kupp is coming back this year and is actually productive, that I actually think without Puka, Puka could take a step forward and be better in year 2, which was what we should expect from a skill level. And yet his statistics would take a step back, would be my expectation. It's just it has to be that way. Matt Porter does a great job of putting this. You're saying Puka should regress to his mean. It's not a regression to some other mean. People are expecting his mean to improve because that's what most rookie wide receivers do, but his mean is much likelier to be below his rookie season. That's exactly right. I think he was above his mean what his actual average is of what his ability is. And I do think it can elevate in year 2 and he gets better and his expectations are higher. And it still would be hard for him to put up these same numbers. And I mean, I don't even necessarily think that putting up these same numbers is super hard. It'd be hard for him to grow from these numbers, right? Like, he already got a season where Cooper Kupp was not very involved and no one else was really that involved either. No one else had 500 receiving yards. But I do think he's going to be very, very good and continue to grow. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's still like the Anquan Boldin thing. And the point I was trying to make about Boldin was he was good in year 2. He was good in year 3. Year 2, he misses some time. Maybe Puka misses some time in year 2. That kind of thing can happen. But maybe Puka has the Anquan Boldin year 3 season in year 2, where similar circumstance basically puts up an identical season, slightly better in a couple of the stats, slightly more yards, slightly more touchdowns, or whatever it was that we just looked at in Anquan Boldin's year 3 that made it slightly better than year 1. I think Puka could be slightly better than this. I don't think you can expect him to just go even higher and like catch 130 balls and go for 1,700 or 1,800 yards like that Kupp season a few years ago. It's possible. If you told me one guy was going to do that this year, a team that concentrates stuff as much as these guys, Puka Nacua would be in that discussion for me. It would mean that Kupp basically is hurt the whole year again, and Nacua is the guy, and he becomes the next Kupp. I mean, that's an out if Kupp gets hurt again. I'm just saying that in like a baseline expectation season, if Kupp's going to get more work, it could come at the expense of the other players in the rotation. But I think it probably impacts Nakua's stat line if we're using 2023 as a baseline, which really we shouldn't be, as Matt is saying. 2023 wasn't a baseline. It was above his mean. It was a great year, but the situation also dictated him getting absolutely hammered with volume at times. So anyway, I think he's an intriguing play. Historical Anomaly says, what do you think about a Kupp bounce back year? Seems like if he ended the year top 5 wide receiver, it would not be that surprising. That's exactly right. I mean, I think the fact that he's been so elite in the recent past, yes, he is 30, but he's not like 33. He's actually going to turn 31 here in 6 days. So he's about to be that age. So this will be his age 31 season, but health-wise, his body might already be breaking down. You might want to, I'm basically playing him even to the field. I'm definitely taking some Kupp. I'll probably be a little bit overweight because I see that ceiling, but I also have missed on players like this in the past where I've chased a past ceiling that's not there anymore. And a point that I've also made on some of these streams is like, if we all understood a little bit better that players' primes don't look like what we just saw from Anquan Boldin. For most players, great players even, you go click on their season logs, a lot of times it's 3-4 seasons, that's it. And we remember them as great players, but they can't do it forever. And once they start to fall off, they don't come back. Like it's over a lot of the time. That's not for everyone, though. The best players do come back some. Like even like the Anquan Boldin game log when he was in Baltimore, he wasn't as good. And he ends up having some great seasons at age 33, age 34 in San Francisco. Larry Fitzgerald had a couple bad years while still in Arizona when they went through some thin times and he was maybe a little banged up. The quarterback was banged up. And then at the back end of his career gets good again and has like 3 or 4 more 100 catch seasons, 300 catch seasons in a row or something, and in his 30s. Those are the outliers, the players that do it for that long, the Larry Fitzgerald and Anquan Boldin type players. But there are guys that can come back and continue to be really productive when they're the elite of the elite. And Cooper Kupp, as far as like how good is Cooper Kupp, he had the greatest wide receiver season ever. I think that's pretty unquestionable because not only was he so good all 17 weeks that year when he had like 1,900 yards, they went on to win the Super Bowl in large part because of him, because he was even better in the 4 postseason games, like yards per game. I think it was like, if you go by fantasy points per game, his 4 postseason games was a higher points per game rate than his 17 regular season games, which was like the highest scoring season of all time. You'd think he would come down from that against good teams that are going to try and take him away, but he had monster game after monster game in their postseason run. He kept up that monster season for 21 games. And then, he broke down the next season. He broke down this past season. But he showed us a really, really high ceiling Nick Bird says the McBride Kupp pairing feels so nice when it falls. I do like getting that at the 3-4 turn for sure. So this idea that he could finish the year as a top 5 wide receiver, not being that surprising, I think is very much there. I think Nacua is going to help him. He has to be healthy and stay healthy. Just Snowman here says, I just feel a couple inevitably get injured. Can't shake that feeling. It makes sense. He's got hurt the last 2 years. He feels like he's a walking soft tissue issue. I'm a poet, didn't know it. And he's just getting older. So, we haven't seen him play a full season since that 21-game season I was just talking about, that as the best wide receiver season ever, when you can include the playoffs and consider that he did it for that many games. So anyway, I like taking the swings on Kupp. I've argued on ship chasing. I don't love taking Nacua with Kupp, and this is an important point, like on Underdog, because Nacua goes 1-2 turn, Kupp goes 3-4 turn. And when you take Nacua late 1, you have the option to take Kupp late 3 a lot of the time. And in most cases, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to stack up these 2 players and build out a Rams thing. And they are a super concentrated team. But part of my thing with Nacua is, like, at his price, he needs to have this season again, or something close to it. Last year's season, 1,400 yards, 105 catches, which means that Kupp's probably not super healthy, and he's doing something like he did last year where he has 700, 800 yards. If Kupp jumps up to where he's a 1,200-yard guy again and is a value and worth going at the 3rd round, then I think Nacua is more like a mid-second value. He's not really worth the 1-2 turn. I think he's falling back down to like a 1,200-yard season where Kupp's putting up 1,000 yards or something like that. I don't hate the idea that they could both be really good, and then you also have the spike weeks late, and the Rams offense is just the one that you wanted to be on in the postseason. So I will build some Nacua Kupp teams, but I mean, in terms of all of these stacking situations being a little bit unique, which I do believe, I think not everyone's going to have their different approaches, but some people, when they look at stacks, will say, I just want to throw everybody in and not try to predict it too much, because it is hard to predict. Other people, myself included, will say, I want to look at each situation sort of independently and make an independent analysis about what I think the range of outcomes is for each of these players, how dependent they are, how correlated their ceilings are. And that's really the point that I'm making here, is I don't know that I think that at those costs that Nacua and Kupp's ceiling outcomes are heavily correlated. I do think there's scenarios where they both hit 70th percentile outcomes and are both really good plays, and your team's good for having both of them, and they're kind of ping-ponging weeks throughout the year, etc. And I think their true ceilings are in some ways uncorrelated, the really outlier seasons. You don't have to get the outlier seasons out of either of them, and that's why I'm saying you can still draft them together. I just think this is a unique one where it's not as straightforward. I don't want to just throw these guys in together because it is partly because it is so concentrated. I don't really think the pie is going to get any bigger. McVay still likes to use the running backs in the red zone. They're going to score touchdowns. Kyren Williams, 12 rushing TDs last year, right? They're going to score some TDs in close on the ground. Akers had one. Darrell Henderson had 2. They had 15 running. Oh, and Freeman had 2. They had 17 running back rushing touchdowns last year. And Kyren had another 3 receiving, which were, I think, mostly short passes. They throw to the running backs a little bit in the red zone as well. That limits the size of the pie. Certainly some of the TDs could shift back to passing, but it limits some of the size of the pie in the Rams offense for overall receiving scoring. And then just the fact that they are not going to be a massive pass volume team, 4,300 yards passing last year, Stafford's health being key. I don't think they're going to be a really, really high pass rate team. They'll be aggressive at times, but McVay's been fairly neutral at pass rate over expected type stats in most seasons of his career. If they're both huge hits, if Puka and Kupp are massive wins, but they went and drafted a day 2 running back to make sure they had depth at running back this year. It's tricky. I don't know that the pie can get that big, and it's already so consolidated. So the idea of them both hitting these massive ceilings, when I think about expensive teammates, and I think about the Texans, I can tell myself that Nico Collins and Diggs could both hit these massive ceilings because I'm telling myself that CJ Stroud's having his Patrick Mahomes year 2 season where he threw for 5,000 yards and 50 TDs. I can tell myself that there's so much to the pie, and it's concentrated, right? Maybe Tank Dell misses time. And so Nico and Diggs really concentrate that work, but there's a lot there. I just have a hard time telling myself there's that much there in a lot of the instances for the Rams. And so it's just, I want to be thoughtful about pairing them together. And in this particular analysis of these particular players, when I correlate these guys, I find myself being more interested if I want to do a Ram stack and I get Stafford in tacking on this guy at the end to make it a double stack. And for those listening on the audio, I just highlighted Demarcus Robinson, who didn't play a lot last season until late. It was all Tutu Atwell. I want to show you guys, the game logs. I always go over to that snap percentage column, right? You get Demarcus Robinson playing 3 snaps in week 1, 6, 1, 7, then none in, for several weeks, then 9, then 7. And then in week 12, he plays 40 snaps, 60%, then 59 the next week, 59%. And then the next 4 weeks, he's at 86%, 95%, 93%, 92%. In the playoff game, he was at 86%. The team told us why. They liked his run blocking, and then it allowed them to do more in the again, they don't want to have to substitute. So in terms of like reading out what the defense does, we want to run on this play. Okay, now we have Demarcus Robinson on the field to help with the run blocking. We want to pass. We have Kupp and Nacua out there. So Robinson's their wide receiver 3. They go give him, let's go to over the cap. Demarcus Robinson's contract. He's a free agent after last year. He's a 30-year-old, has had some bad seasons, frankly. They give him $4 million. It's all dead money here. No cap savings. It's all guaranteed. Fully guaranteed $4 million contract, which isn't like a massive number, but it's fully guaranteed. If we go over to the yards per route run database on him, I like to show this every now and then. Go back to his last year in Kansas City. He had a 7.8% targets per route run. That's horrible. And all the other seasons, like 12, 10%, was never any good. But then his 1 year in Baltimore, he gets out of that Kansas City sort of typecast role, and he has a 20% targets per route run in that stretch in Baltimore. Not really efficient on the yards per target, but actually earned a lot of volume. And then last year goes to the Rams. And this is what I was talking about him a little bit last offseason, is if he played in 3 receiver sets, he could consolidate enough routes in those games. And we just saw he was playing 90% of the snaps in those games. He would be out there, and maybe he could be, instead of the guy who in his Chiefs career was like almost down at 10% targets per run, which is really, really low. Clearly sub 15%. Maybe he could be above 15% targets per out run guy, and he was last year, and he was efficient on it. Career high yards per out run, and spiked some touchdowns late. Had touchdowns in 4 straight games. He went 5 straight games with 12 plus half PPR points late. Or maybe he had touchdowns in 3 straight. And that 12 plus half PPR. No, yeah, 4 straight games. All 5 of these games down the stretch for him, because he has 692 in week 17 without a TD, which is still a 12.2 game. All 5 of those games down the stretch are 12 plus points. He's going to have some, like a lot of his game logs are going to be 40 and 50 receiving yards, but he's going to score some touchdowns, and he's going to have some usable weeks that look like these 3, which are 3 games where he went 4 for 55 and 1, then another one went 3 for 46 and 1, and then 2 for 44 and 1. The last 2 games in that sample, 6 for 82 and 1, 6 for 92, a little less likely, but he does, because he's out there so much, he does have 2 games where he gets to 10 targets. In the postseason game, 6 targets, 3 catches, 44 yards, no touchdown. That's not a very usable week, and he's going to have games like that. It's not going to be as consistent as it looks on this end of season run. This was just, he got hot and had a high floor for a 5-week stretch. Week 17, he barely plays, by the way. Didn't do anything in week 17, but he played about 40% of the snaps. I mean, it's a good example of how he can play a half and not get a target, because he's not the focal point of the offense by any means. But in terms of late round wide receivers, This guy's not going to give you upside either. I mean, that's the big thing with a lot of the late round receivers. You want to find this year's Puka Nacua, you got to go to rookies. You got to go to young guys who end up being breakouts. But if you have a need in your build for a little more correlation with the Rams and Cardinals games, or for like a little more stability because you've already built in a lot of rookies in the earlier rounds and you already have a lot of breakout plays and you just want a routes-based play, this is the type of routes-based play you want to go after. A guy who has the ability to play 90% of the snaps all season long, be out there in an offense that's not going to rotate a lot. It's going to play heavy 11 personnel. He's not going to get targeted anywhere near what Puka and Kupp are going to do, but he's the way, in my opinion, if you want to double stack the Rams to make a directional bet on, like if you take Puka and you get Stafford and then you take Demarcus Robinson late, well, then if Kupp misses time, you get your ceiling season from Puka and the correlated boost to Demarcus Robinson, who now has to be a little bit more involved in the passing game with Kupp out. Vice versa, you could do it with Kupp, Stafford, and add Robinson. Now you're saying maybe Puka misses some time or falls off or whatever, sophomore slump, whatever it is. But if Kupp's hitting his ceiling and the passing game, you wanted to make a bet on the passing game as well, that's why you took Stafford, then I think Demarcus Robinson is the really obvious double stack. Now you can triple stack it. I'm sure some of the people that really like to throw a lot of guys onto a stack will tell you could go Nacua, Kupp, you could take Stafford, and you could still throw Demarcus Robinson on there. And that's probably fine. But I just think he's a really easy way to play the Rams without having to make such a big investment in Nacua in the first and Kupp in the third, but you can still double stack the offense, and he can be brought along by a Stafford ceiling week. If Stafford throws 3-4 touchdowns, Demarcus Robinson's a decent bet to have scored that week, and then you have a usable week, and that's the idea of correlation. So anyway, I'm pretty excited about Robinson late. I've taken a decent amount of him. We saw that when we looked at my exposures last time. I'm not really into Higbee, mostly just because Higbee's getting older and they've brought in some other tight ends in the last couple of years, but I could see people making a case that he's like should be getting drafted. I don't think he even gets drafted really, or maybe if he does, I just don't even look at him. But yeah, I think Kyren's a good pick right now at his price. I think Corum's one of the better handcuffs in all of fantasy. I think Nacua's a fine pick that's probably slightly overvalued because his rookie season was one where he ran really hot. But I still I think he's good, and I think his mean is he's going to get better. The offseason reports are good. So I don't want to be out on Nacua. Even if I have to pay a little bit more to make that bet, then I think I should have to. I still want him in my portfolio. I think Kupp's a reasonable bounce back bet that I want in my portfolio, and I think Demarcus Robinson's one of the best veteran routes-based plays in the later rounds. You're not going to get ceiling games out of him. If you already have enough targets and enough floor in your wide receiver room, you don't really need to draft him because he's not really adding a ton other than just contingency if you have injuries or whatever. And again, I think people tend to be a little bit over the top on how much contingency to put into their builds. I don't think you have to throw contingency into your builds, but I do think he's going to be a high win rate player for the most part. I think unless he gets hurt or whatever. The other part of this I wanted to show is the Tutu Atwell thing, where Atwell actually has a really good year last year, but we showed Robinson's playing time because Atwell was the guy who lost the playing time. You go to his offensive snaps early in the year. This is the snaps by percentages starting in week 1, 79%, 94%, 87, 78, 89, 88, 74, 97, 67, 88. And then that week 12 game when Demarcus Robinson started getting involved, he's down to 36, 39, 12. He's inactive, 6%, 6%. He plays 93% in week 18. Matt notes here that Rams didn't play any starters week. He said week 17. I think he meant week 18. Further evidence that Demarcus Robinson's one of McVay's guys. They played Robinson about 40% of the snaps, but not much in week 18 when Carson Wentz got the start. But Tutu Atwell was back out there for 93% of the snaps because he was healthy. He just got phased out in these late season stretches, only played 8 snaps in the playoff game as well. He did have a 38-yard TD in that game. They like him as the other part of this is like he was productive. 119 yards in week 1. He has some touchdowns in the middle part of the season. He gives you that TD in the playoffs. The week that he got phased out initially, he goes 3 for 76 on 3 targets in his first 36% snap share game, where his snap share wasn't really high. He actually has a big game. But they were like, this is not about receiving production. Like, and from a fantasy perspective, we think this is playing good when he has stats. But the Rams are not looking at Tutu Atwell's receiving yardage as it doesn't matter to them. They have Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp as their other 2 starting receivers. They want their third receiver to be bigger, to be able to run block, to be versatile, to be able to run block and run routes, right? Tutu Atwell is so small that he lost his playing time because he can't stay on the field for run blocking, or he couldn't run block well enough. It was damaging their running game. And they told us that they liked that about Demarcus Robinson. There's a lot of quotes and stuff, and the run game got a little better down the stretch. And then they paid Demarcus Robinson this offseason. Tutu Atwell is going to have rotational plays and stuff, but I'm not concerned about him like cutting into Demarcus Robinson's role unless somehow the offense has to take that shape. It doesn't want to run anymore. Maybe both their running backs get hurt. They really want to go pass heavy, and then they're like, all right, well, we're just going to throw 80% of the time. Then I think you could see Tutu back out there. But that's just like a really extreme outcome that I think Demarcus Robinson's the fit that they want for that wide receiver 3 spot, and that's why they paid him the guaranteed money to make sure he was back on the roster this year. So he is a nice bet. I'm not certain that he'll keep the role for 17 games either, but as a veteran who and he's 29, he'll turn 30 in September. He's not crazy old. He's been around for a long time, but he was kind of young when he came in, age 22. Yeah, I don't know, man. I just think he plays pretty much the whole season. So that's how I break down the Rams. Let's see some of your guys' thoughts. Cedric Benson was another throwback. Malcolm Brown. We never mentioned him. Daryl Richardson, a couple other of the throwback guys. Fantasy Football Garage just can't stop drafting players from that Arizona at LAR game. I love that Week 17 game too, man. I just told you I loved all those Rams profiles for the season. Also love McBride, obviously. Kyler's one of my favorite QB values. I mean, I'm taking not Cedric Benson, but Trey Benson quite a bit. I'm not taking a lot of James Conner, but I'm definitely taking some Cardinals as well. I'll take a Zay Jones pick late. I actually kind of like Zay Jones over Michael Wilson, but I've taken both late. Historical Anomaly says the Rams put their behind-the-scenes draft video on YouTube. They seem pretty excited about Corum. We're talking about him as early as round 2. They get excited about a lot of guys, man. I mean, they got really excited about like Van Jefferson and stuff. They got excited about Kyren. I do think Corum's going to play. But I think they were so excited about Corum because they talked about this. Specifically, he runs similarly to Kyren. There was something about how some of the rushing game went into more shotgun because it was a better fit for Stafford and for Kyren. And it was like they're similar, like duo blocking schemes, I think it is, but they do it out of the shotgun with Kyren in a different way than some of the earlier backs. And then that's something that's Blake Corum's skill set as well. And so a big reason they brought in Corum was like they felt like they got a Kyren clone was like the whole idea. So yeah, they're excited about him because he was a great fit for their scheme and everything, and it gives them redundancy. That doesn't mean they're going to like, and I don't even know that Historical Anonymous was saying this, but it doesn't mean that they're going to play Corum over Kyren necessarily, right? Like that doesn't tell me a lot about their play splits. I think they're very pumped to have Corum, and I think Corum's a good handcuff. I think people are going to be surprised that Corum is not the standalone value guy that they thought he might be. MTM Revolt says Evan Silva was on Corum first running back drafted. Definitely felt like he was the second best running back in the draft. There's people who are really high on Corum for sure. Stafford always made his wide receivers right too, even in Detroit. That's another great point. Stafford, the QB, and McVay, the system, make these skill position players very enticing for fantasy football. Same with, obviously, like over in Miami, we have a similar situation. We want these offenses to get the ball to their good players' hands. They have good play designers and good schemes, and they use misdirection and motion and all those things to get free releases and to get their good players open and then get the ball to them. They're like, we want the ball in our good players' hands. We're going to make that happen. That's fantastic. That's what we want for fantasy, right? Sean G asked, is 2-2 dead or is the D-Rob hype gone too far? I think I just broke that down. Obviously, Cards Rams game so easy to stack from the end of the board. Yep, that back, you have Puka, you have Marvin Harrison early 2, you have Kupp, you have McBride, Benson. Obviously, like back of the board doesn't matter as much, but I feel like he ends up landing in that back range a decent amount. Super easy. Yeah, super easy from that back draft slot. Let's see. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate you, Tyler. Right. Higbee's going to miss a lot of the season. Tiger Uppercut mentions. I kind of blew past his injury, but Colby Parkinson is the guy they brought in. All right. I'm going to go back to the drafts. We're going to finish up here pretty quick. Let's get the final few teams knocked out. The Eliminators are the ones that we're going to get over to, but that fast-moving Best Ball Mania, I'm back up in the 9th already in this one. 1, 2, 4, 1. Lamar Jackson build. I don't take a ton of Lamar, but this was a Breece Hall team at 109. I took Olave, Zay Flowers, and then coming back after taking Zay, stacked him with Lamar. Tank Dell was off the board. Sam Laporta and Trey McBride were both off the board, as were Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. I could have went like T. Higgins, but kind of thin at receiver at that point. I could have went Travis Kelce to grab a tight end there, but I was okay seeing what came back to me at tight end, and Kyle Pitts did come back to me. This was an intriguing pick here where I took Pitts over Xavier Worthy. I hoped one of Worthy or Hollywood Brown might make it back around. They both go. Jaden Reed as well was one I would have taken if he came back around. He goes. I hoped I might get a wide receiver value at 64. So I took Pitts ahead at ADP at 57 because 2 of the 3 drafters behind me did not have a tight end yet. The guy in between had taken both Laporta and McBride. So I don't think Pitts comes back to me either if I try to push him, because Kittle was already off the board before Pitts in this draft. So I think it's one of those things where I wasn't going to get Pitts and Worthy. I decided I'd have a better shot to get a wide receiver value to fall through. I end up taking a Dunze on the backside of that. So the Lamar pick does put stress on, but rather than Kelce, I get Pitts. And then to take Pitts, I have to give up Worthy, but rather than Worthy, I get a Dunze. Those don't feel like massive drop-offs. And now I actually have an anchor QB, running back, and tight end in the early rounds, plus a Dunze. But the tricky thing is it gets back to me at 81 in the late 7th. And Deontay Johnson went 1 pick before me. I was tilted about. Rashee Rice sometimes falls there. He went 76 in this draft. JSN has kind of moved up enough that he's not going to be there at 81 very frequently. So I have to take DeAndre Hopkins, who's actually a pretty big ADP value. And the first time I've taken him there, we've talking about him on stream a little bit. He actually earned volume at a high rate last year, but wasn't efficient on it. But that doesn't mean like he's definitely dust. Like that could have been quarterback play, although the quarterback's the same. So I haven't been taking a lot of him, but I have been taking like Devonta Adams in a similar sense that like he continued to earn volume like the elite he has always been. DeAndre Hopkins, an elite player for most of his career. He's older, but still high targets per out run last year. The efficiency stuff is more of a concern with him. It was worse, and he had some long touchdowns that should have boosted it, including one in Levis's first start that was a clear offensive OPI that got missed where he like threw the defender out. He wasn't separating on some of those plays anymore. He looks a little bit slower, but get an ADP value on him on a team that needs some stability at receiver, and he has the ability to earn volume like that. I think he's fine at pick 81 when those other guys are off the board. So I take him to help out the running back room a little bit, or the receiver room a little bit. And so this is the team I wrote up a piece yesterday at my Substack about Ramondre Stevenson, who I think was probably the pick at 81. Before I did a little thinking about him and decided I didn't really want to be on Ramondre there, let him go. And then in the 6 picks before it comes back to me, Ramondre doesn't get taken, but both Najee and Jalen Warren go, Zach Moss goes, DeAndre Swift goes, and Jonathan Brooks goes. I think I would have taken any of those 5 over Ramondre on the way back. They all go ahead of Ramondre. I think they all have ADPs behind him. And so then at 88, I was like, all right, well, I guess I got to be a little bit humble here, humility-based drafting, and take Ramondre at an ADP discount as well. He comes in about 6 picks behind ADP there. He'll be my RB2. So this is the Lamar Jackson, Breece Hall, Ramondre, Chris Olave, Zay Flowers, Roma Dunze, DeAndre Hopkins with Kyle Pitts. It's a good team. Kyle Pitts gives me a bring back on Jaden Daniels, who is the second top player available, but I already have Lamar and they match a bye. Probably don't want to have to go to a 3 QB build. The other move is that Tyler Lockett is there. And then the other move is that Javonte Williams is there. Tyler Lockett's a bring back on a Dunze, get a little Chicago-Seattle thing going. It also opens up Geno as a QB2. And I don't love Roma Dunze and DeAndre Hopkins as my 3-4. As much as I talked favorably about that, there's still an issue here where I went running back in the first round, and then I went QB in 4 and tight end in 5. That makes your team thinner at receiver, and you're catching up a little bit. This feels like a Lockett pick. The guy at the turn has 5 running backs already. The guy out of the 12 hole. The 11 hole has 3 and 3 receivers, which, you never really know what people are going to do, but I would assume there's going to be a lot more receiver picks at this turn than running back picks. There's 2 running backs on the 10 hole. Probably Javonte Williams goes, and I don't get a shot at getting him on the way back. But Lockett's sort of the last of a tier here. The next receivers available, Romeo Doubs, Khalil Shakir, and then Mike Williams, who has fallen some, but I would have ahead of Shakir and Doubs, I think. But I'm going to go Lockett. I think this team needs the Lockett pick, even though I want to take Jaden Daniels without the bye being right, and I want to take Javonte Williams. He doesn't really fit as well either. He's got the same bye as Ramondre. I already have 2 running backs at this point. I need to get the receiver. All right. Oh, then a Superflex puppy came up as well. We're going to grab that pick real quick as well. This is a 1-1-2 right now. I have Cousins, Bijan, Tyreek, and Adams. So I started Tyreek Bijan late. This was a 0 QB, and then I took Cousins over a Jalen Waddle and Devontae Adams, although I took Adams on the way back here, over a Saquon. That's not a pick you love to make. But, again, that QB dead zone type of concept where the gap between a Kirk Cousins level quarterback and some of these skill players is probably fairly wide. That said, I already made a bet on Bijan. I like making bets on Atlanta's offense. I think Cousins, if he can come back healthy, could be a good late round quarterback for sure. I have Pitts in the queue because it's a Cousins Bijan and I didn't get Drake London. His ADP 76. I don't know if I'd be able to get him back to the next turn where I pick at 83, but it would be hard to take him over Trey McBride straight up. Geno Smith is the top available QB. I talked with Sean on Stealing Bananas about wanting to make a few more bets on Geno, just being the 17-game starter. Bryce Young, Derek Carr. Because I'm on the turn here, this might be a quarterback turn. Because, again, can I really assume that I'm going to be able to get another quarterback at pick 83? But, man, this is gross to go Geno over so Diggs and Trey McBride are the best available skill position players. Pitts is not an elite tight end. He's just priced like one. I mean, I guess that's your opinion, man. Chat saying not Pitts here. I I don't think I'm certainly not taking him this pick. I don't think I'll take him at 602 on the way back. I'm trying to figure out the 2 picks at this turn. And I think one might be a QB at this turn. I don't have a tight end yet, but I kind of want to pass McBride. Tight ends can really fall in Superflex. There's a lot of people that's the position they want to push. For me, it's running back, right? I think the pick just sort of in a vacuum here is Diggs. He's just like, think about a normal draft. Diggs goes way ahead of McBride. He even goes, comfortably ahead of Zay Flowers also being there, though. Oh, man. Maybe I should go Geno. I kind of want to go Geno because I can also stack him with JSN and lock it later. I'm going to do Geno. It's not really a great use of quarterback capital, but I do it because I'm on the turn here, and I can go Diggs, Flowers, or McBride on the way back. And any of those is, I think, a comfortable additional stacked piece. I would prefer to have grabbed Diggs, but the guy on the turn I didn't want to have to go to Levis or JJ McCarthy. Bryce Young and Derek Carr would have been fine. Fallbacks from Geno. But I don't think Bryce Carr and Derek Young make it back to me. And so then I think I don't get completely boxed out of QB, but maybe I could have got Bo Nix as my QB2. But I think taking a QB at this turn was useful. And then Geno for me was sort of a tier up in terms of how I can build with him with JSN and lock it later and what I think he could be in the ceiling cases. And so I wanted to get him at this turn. And I think I have other outs for my other pick, which will be another high-end skill position player. I might lose Diggs. I might lose Diggs and McBride, in which case I'll go Flowers. Seeing that Flowers was there as well and that there's no way this guy in the turn can take all 3 of those guys, I feel comfortable with any of those 3 at my 602 pick. So I took Geno at 5'11 there. Tiger says he maybe would have gone Diggs and then decided between Geno McBride, whichever makes it back. Grant asks about the draft capital and playoff matchups on screen. It's a draft caddy from Brick, who's a stud DFS guy. He also does LOLs with Peter Overzet. Brian Hooper, really smart guy, has coded this up. If you go to BRIC75.com, create an account. It's like $25 a month. Then you have to get it into your extensions and get it hooked up. Takes a little bit of work to figure out, but I was able to figure it out, and I'm not tech savvy. It's a cool, very, very cool tool. You can also use it to like give you suggestions, which is pretty awesome as well. All right, I took Geno. That was a little bit of a tough pick there, but we're done with the Superflex stuff. We're going to go into the Eliminator. Totally different draft type now, right? Totally different strategies, totally different conceptual stuff. I've written that I like 0RB in this as well, though. I mean, so not totally different. I'm always talking about 0RB. I like having the elite onesies in this. Although I do still kind of probably want to get to 3 QBs sometimes. But this one I went Jalen Hurts at the late third. So I went Puka Nacua, Drake London, Jalen Hurts, Sam Laporta. I like Hurts over Allen in this just based on buys. I would take Allen over Hurts in any other format. But Hurts has a week 5 bye. It's obviously, we've talked through this with the Eliminator, easier to advance in the early weeks. The pods get tougher to advance from on a percentage basis, and they get tougher in their makeup because as you go along in an Eliminator, the better teams are hanging out. So Hurts is a week 5 bye. Laporta a week 5 bye. I'm able to get Laporta in the 4th round in this after Kelsey at 403. So I'll do a 2 tight end build on this team with Laporta, and then that will free up a little bit more additional running back and receiver value, but also with Jalen Hurts, I think I'm probably pushing QB2 like to the very, very end. I think that makes sense in like round 17 and 18, frankly, to maybe go with 2 other QB options. It's mostly Hurts, but it's a 3 QB build late, which makes this pick either my first running back, which I could do as James Cook, or a receiver, which I only have 2. And in the Eliminator, I've argued you want to build receiver depth. Calvin Ridley is the best available receiver by ADP. Rome Odunze, Chris Godwin, Jordan Addison. It's not great. So I'm going to make the James Cook pick behind ADP. I haven't been taking a lot of Cook. But he offers a little bit of stability at running back and some scoring. And I think that wide receiver tier is flat, but I'm going to hit it on the way back, sort of regardless. Running back felt like a bigger drop-off, although Kenneth Walker would have been fine on the way back. And I didn't think going receiver there. Structurally, I wanted to go receiver there. But as I looked at the actual players, I didn't think I could justify passing up James Cook or a Kenneth Walker at this turn to take 2 receivers from that group. I mean, Odunze would be my top pick. Addison's a good pick there. And I think you could take, like Godwin. I'm not really taking a lot of Ridley, but you could probably take him too. Week 5 bye. But I don't think 2 of those guys make sense over or taking the swing on your like a good anchor running back there. So I'm going to take an anchor running back and then a receiver on the way back. I'm just going to go ahead and star, some of these dudes. I don't really know the way that I would arrange Ridley versus like Ladd and Keon Coleman, DeAndre Hopkins. The guy I really want to draft is I just want to go all the way down to JSN at this point. All right. Couple more eliminators. This one's a 1030 right now. I was drafting out of the 8 here. Our buddy Eric Beimfor is in the 6. He went really heavy receiver. He's gone 5 straight receivers. I like that. I wrote about that as a 0 RB with a lot of receiver depth as a way to really stabilize the 3 receiver spots in the flex. That's going to give you floor. It's an imbalanced draft. When we think floor, we think balance, but you don't need balance. An imbalanced draft that gives you floor at certain lineup spots. And then you also have some ceiling, which you need to win this thing still. So this is a really intriguing start for him. I like this. Justin Jefferson, Chris Olave, Cooper Kupp in the 3rd, Tank Dell in the 4th. He gets a nice value on Tank, and he goes McLaurin. This is another one where I went Zay, Lamar Jackson, passed up Tank to go for Lamar Jackson. A little bit risky there, but Puka, Drake, London on this one as well. I had that on the last one too. I really like that as a top 2 wide receivers because I do think Puka's a really high floor play for this year. We were just talking through that with the Rams. And I think London's going to get plenty of volume. I don't think people realize how different Atlanta's offense is going to feel. It's going to feel like a modern, good, positive offense for its players compared to probably the worst offense for its players' statistical ceilings that we've seen in like a decade. Like the Arthur Smith offense was not good for guys reaching their statistical potential. You can talk about him being good for wins and losses or whatever, his style. But the way that it was structured, I'm talking about the rotations, the snap percentages not being consolidated, the play designs for backup players, just not elevating the players, more about showing off as a play caller, I guess is the way that I thought about it. So you're going from a really bad end of that spectrum to a potentially really good end of that spectrum. It's going to be a big, big difference for those guys. And that's what I would say to the commenter who is not in on Kyle Pitts as well, that things are going to be a lot different for him, for his ability to reach his potential. He might suck. I don't know. I don't think that's true. Anyway, Nacua London is a really fun start in this. And you get an early buy with Nacua. London's a a later buy and a busier buy at week 12, but still a good value at 205. So then I get Zay Flowers, and then I decide to grab Lamar with him. That's starting to stack up that week 14 buy a little bit. Got to be careful there. Stroud makes it back here. So, I mean, if I had gone Tank, I could have went Stroud. Buy him for a ghost Tank here, and he doesn't go Stroud. I think I like the elite quarterback a little bit more than I think others do in the Eliminator, because I think their combination of floor and ceiling is going to be good enough to really elevate. You can get replaceable QB production with like a 3 QB build late, and I think that makes a lot of sense. You can stack it 3 different ways. It helps to have 3 names in there for the Eliminator. So Dalton Kincaid immediately stands out here as the ADP value. I don't have a tight end yet. He has the week 12 bye. That's a little bit of a headache. Hollywood Brown has the week 6 bye, and there's an intriguing pick here as well. Although, actually, I would just take Xavier Worthy over him straight up. I'm going to take Kincaid here, and then we're going to probably be looking at a receiver coming back. I don't think any of these guys are probably going to make it back, but it might be a Roma Dunze pick or an Addison pick or a JSN pick to get to 4 receivers, but with a high-end QB and high-end tight end. All right, let's go back. Again, I like the 2 tight end builds because it frees up a roster spot. I am leaning more towards the 3 QB builds at this point and getting them all like single stacked. Which means I'm kind of doing like 3, 6, 7, 2 with a 0 RB build where I still want to get to 6 running backs because I'm waiting so long. So I want 7 good receivers. So I still need to be using early draft capital at receiver to get good enough so that I can stop at 7. It could be 3, 5, 8, 2 as well. But to get either of those things, the 2 tight ends is pretty imperative. And to get that, I think you want to be on those elites. One more reason to be on those elites. You should be on them for a variety of reasons. So this one I started Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devonta Adams. Again, a lot of demonstratable target earning. And then I take Laporta in the middle of the 3rd. I'm stacking up that early week 5 bye with Amon-Ra and Laporta. I've already starred Goff, and I'm saying, look, I'm going to be a Lions double stack. There's a directional element too. Like if they throw a lot and they're great and they're expected to, probably Amon-Ra and Laporta, one of them has a solid floor each week, and then potentially both of them are good and usable at the same time. And then once you do make it all the way to the final, assuming that you do, you still want to think about like week 17 is all that matters type of thinking, because you would like to have a stack and be able to actually hit a ceiling. And I believe it's a 115 person final in this. So still got to think through things on that perspective as well. The pick here for me, with T. Higgins off the board and George Pickens already off the board as well, and Zay and Tank Dell and all those guys are off the board, I'm here in the middle of the 4th round, and it's a little bit of a drop-off. Amari Cooper is the best available wide receiver. The pick I would love it to be Trey McBride, but I already took Laporta, and I don't really want to do a Laporta McBride in an eliminator. Christian Kirk's ADP has been rising. I do like him more than Amari, and Amari matches Devonta Adams' week 10 bye. Kirk has a week 12 bye, which is going to match somebody eventually. I could go ETN behind ADP and get that first running back into the build, but I just don't want to. I want to be pretty 0 RB. That's adding fragility to an eliminator. I mean, your immediate thought on that should be like ETN could easily miss time, and then it's an eliminator, man. You need your guys out there. Christian Kirk, stable, productive targets. Excited to add him to an eliminator build there. Last one. 4 receivers and Kelsey so far. Garrett Wilson, Brandon Ayuk, who I don't love in eliminator formats, but I did take in part, and I started hammering these guys in. Like, I don't love his profile because it's a little boom busty, like weekly, but the week 9 bye is really nice, and it's hard to get anyone in the week 9 bye, frankly, if you don't get one of the Steelers running backs or you don't get one of the early Niners guys. It's basically Kittle or like Jalen Warren or, so the only teams on bye are San Fran and Pittsburgh is the point. Or you're betting into late round Steelers guys, which I don't want to be doing because, again, Arthur Smith offense. So I took Ayuk here right about his ADP, a little bit ahead of it as a week 9 buy. And then I also was like, I'm going to need to be deep at a receiver, though, because Ayuk's a little bit of a spike week guy, which maybe isn't great for Eliminator format. Garrett Wilson, Brandon Ayuk, Cooper Kupp. I take Kelsey in the early 4th. I take Jaden Reed in the late 5th. Over Xavier Worthy. Because I already had Kelsey. This is one of those drunk picks from last night, guys. I don't take a lot of Jaden Reed. Was he the ADP value? No. I mean, he's fine. I wish I could talk to my drunk self and think, maybe I was just trying to mix up my exposures, living a little, because I don't have a lot of Reed. I do think the Packers, the best way to play the Packers is through the later, cheaper guys. Shout out to Ontavian Wicks. Everybody's got to mention him, right? But yeah, I mean, Reed, I think probably part of the thought is he's got a stable role and is going to play and is going to get volume and et cetera. So as a wide receiver 4 in this kind of a build, it's probably a buy element here too. Xavier Worthy had the same buy as Kelsey and Cooper Kupp. So maybe I was like, ooh, week 10 buy. Probably was really excited about that when I was hammered. All right. Garrett Wilson, Brandon Ayuk, Cooper Kupp, Travis Kelsey, Jaden Reed, start. Rashad White is the ADP pick. Joe Mixon, Kenneth Walker, maybe? I mean, probably Joe Mixon's a stable play, but week 14 bye, I don't love. Roma Dunze and Jordan Addison, Alvin Kamara. There's no real QB value at all. It's you'd have to reach way ahead to get a QB here. I already have Kelsey, and the other elites are all gone. The guy at the turn took Pitts and Kittle. So I'm going to take Roma Dunze. Again, another intriguing bye week element. The Bears are the other week 7's the other week that only has 2 buys. So the Bears are matched up with the Cowboys that week. Also, because he's my 5th receiver, I don't have to be quite as concerned about massive volume early, but I do think he still provides you a lot of late season ceiling. And I think he's going to have more playing time and a better floor than I think people think. I think he's going to provide okay value throughout the season, or okay. When I say value, I mean use potential for usable weeks, right? But the late season upside when the pods get tougher and in the 115 person final, I want to have some ceiling. And so this is a really nice first 5 receivers: Garrett Wilson, Brandon Ayuk, Cooper Kupp, Jaden Reed, Roma Dunze. It's got Kelsey. No QBs and running backs yet. But this is the type of build where I'm not matching any buys in that wide receiver room at all, and have hit on some tough buys. Is going to allow me to go after some week 12 and week 14 guys in other spots. This is a team that could maybe end up with a Jane Daniels, who has the week 14 bye. But I like this, and then I'm going to go away from receiver, fairly soon. All right, that's it. Oh, that's not it. One Best Ball Mania. Man, that fast-moving Best Ball Mania is already back up in the 11th, or maybe this is a slightly different one. But this team is Jaden Daniels, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Brooks, Garrett Wilson, Michael Pittman, well behind ADP. Still interesting. Xavier Worthy, Christian Watson, Joshua Palmer, Laporta and Kittle. I have Goff starred, and he's behind ADP because he would pair with Jaden Daniels, and I have Jahmyr Gibbs and Laporta with a Kittle bring back. So I really want Goff to be the pick here if he came to me. Garrett Wilson, Gibbs start. I get Gibbs at 203. I get Laporta late 3, so I build out this Lions thing right away. And then I get Kittle with the bring back. Pittman at 39 ahead of T. Higgins on a team that doesn't have Malik Neighbors or anything as a correlation. Christian Kirk had already gone. Bose and Tank had gone. Amari Cooper had already gone. I guess I just decided I wanted to be a little bit humility-based and say, what if I'm wrong about Michael Pittman? But I don't. I mean, I think he's so mispriced that this is still an overdraft, even at the ADP value. And I would have thought that Higgins would have had to have been gone for me to take him, to explain why I'm so confused here. At any rate, Worthy, Kittle, Christian Watson, because I just felt like I had to get a receiver there. Only had 3, and one of them was Michael Pittman. I get Joshua Palmer at 111 because, again, I'm like, man, I do not have good enough receivers at this stage. I don't like the receiver room, but I am taking Jared Goff here. That closes up my QB room. It's going to be a Jaden Daniels, Jared Goff team. I don't have Daniels stacked up at all yet. I have McCaffrey and Austin Eckler and Dotson and Sinat all starred in the queue, and we'll do that in the later rounds, probably with McCaffrey. All right. That's it. We did it all. I'm going to take a couple quick questions. I get these comments on every stream. Woke up and you were midstream, went to run an errand, came back, and the Madman is still alive. Love to see it. Appreciate you guys that check back in. Ben says he's in an eliminator slow right now with Hurts at 408 and McBride at 505. He feels great about. That's great. I mean, late four for Hurts. I took him like early 3. Usually that would be a 3-4 turn thing. You would tap Hurts in late 3, McBride in early 4 to get them at 4-5 is very nice. You still get that, those anchors. Tiger Uppercut here says James Cook was the pick there. Ridley Tier isn't great there. Yep, agreed. I might even take Walker in that draft too and keep pushing receiver because it's just not. It depends if like a Dunze goes in that one, but it's not. You can't just. I don't know. Sometimes you gotta swerve into the avalanche too. So we'll see. Ben says I don't think I've seen it yet, but any love for Mixon this year when he slides? I don't think I've seen him on any of your teams. I've taken him. I do. Yeah, I like him when he slides. Actually, I mean, I don't love Joe Mixon the talent. I think I've made that clear over the years, but I love the Houston offense. He got traded there. He got extended. He got paid a bunch of money. There's a stability there. He's going to play. He's going to get opportunities. He's going to catch some passes. He's going to get touchdown potential. Like he might be one of the better mid-round running backs. I don't like it at all, but I have taken him when he slides. The problem for me with him is that whole tier of running back is right in the range where I'm usually taking elite tight ends, and if not, then I'm adding to my receivers, right? And running back's like the last position I consider there. Sometimes I'm even considering a QB. It's like I just don't take a lot of James Cook at all, and I want to take him. I've taken no Pacheco. I have taken one Mixon when he slides. I would rank Mixon ahead of Pacheco. And I would rank him ahead of Rachaad White for sure, who I know is in that range as well. But I just don't take a lot of running backs in that range is the biggest reason you haven't seen him on a lot of my teams. A little bit concerned about that. A-Rod says, nah, it's Hollywood over Worthy all day. That's fine. You can keep taking him. I mean, I don't mind taking Hollywood, but Xavier Worthy was a really good prospect before he ran the fastest combine time in NFL history. He also was a first-round pick they traded up for. If he's good, believe me, you're going to want him as the late-season guy. He might not play a ton early. I'm a little concerned about the early playing, but if he plays early, like it's over. Hollywood's on a 1-year deal. Worthy's like probably Patrick Mahomes, wide receiver 1 of the future. Love doing the 2 tight end build with Bowers as the second guy. Costs a little less draft capital on that second QB. I love this too, Matt. I've been trying to do it more. The tough thing is when Bowers goes, like I do feel like it ends up being a pretty big hit to your build, which is why you see Sean always wanted to take Bowers kind of high ahead of, because it's like he's got Bowers so high, you feel like there's a big tier break if you don't get that Bowers pick in. But yeah, I want to get more Bowers. It's a probably the optimal way to do it, to have Bowers as your second guy. And if he's that stud that he looks like he could be, you get the advantages of the two elite tight end thing without having to pay it. Appreciate you checking it out. DMO Ozone. DM Ozone says this is a pretty cool idea for a stream with a slow drafts. First time seeing it in action. Appreciate you. All of you guys, hit the like button, subscribe, turn on the notifications because I don't always make it clear when I'm going live, but kind of happens at random times when I have a lot of drafts backed up and have a little bit of available time. I had some time this morning. Do got to get going here after a 3-hour stream. Meatwad, appreciate you making drunk picks way better for diversification than 8% all. I mean, I agree with this. My drunk self has a lot different of, you know how they say like you have a drunk memory, and then there's a show called that, right? I don't know, Drunk History, but whatever. Like you remember things when you're in a certain mental state that you like were like a revelation to you the last time you were in that mental state. So you get drunk and you have some, or you smoke some weed and you have a certain mental breakthrough, but then you don't really remember it when you're sober. But then the next time you get drunk, you're like, oh, I should write that down. For sure. Like you get into a different mental state, you're going to have a little bit of a different way of analyzing things. And then you may not remember it when you're sober. That's why I was trying to figure out that Jaden Reed pick. Pretty sure I made it last night. Meatwad says every pick and share he has at night while being rather a little stoned or buzzed. That's, it's the only time to draft George Pickens when you're living a little. I had a draft where I got Jordan Love and all 4 Green Bay wide receivers. How dumb was that? Tiger uppercut. I don't think it was like super dumb. Again, this is one of those ones where I think all the correlation stuff is unique. If Jordan Love is a breakout star, people are comparing him to CJ Stroud. Some of the Green Bay people are kind of annoying on Twitter because they're like, they think that he's clearly better than CJ Stroud. And they're like coming at CJ Stroud for like some of his interviews and some of the content he's done this offseason. It's like, man, it doesn't have to be about Stroud, man. You don't have to have like a complex about the other good young quarterback because you don't think Jordan Love's getting enough attention. Like that's gross. But if Love is that good, then I think it actually makes sense. It's a little bit more expensive than I want because Dontavian Wicks has come up and Jaden Reed's like weirdly expensive. But I guess, Christian Watson, if you're not like jamming him ahead of like JSN and Rashee Rice, and for me, Deontay Johnson, but maybe not for everyone. But if you're getting Christian Watson at a good price after that, like tier break, frankly, once Deontay Johnson's gone, and then you maybe get Watson a little bit behind ADP or something, I think they're going to rotate enough. And then obviously Dobbs is, a later pick. I think Dobbs is probably the worst pure value, but Wicks has gotten so expensive too that you wind up spending a lot of capital to make this happen because Love's expensive. So I imagine he was like 5th round, 8th, 9th, 11th, 12th or something. Like you're giving up a lot of picks to make that happen. I'd be really intrigued to see like what you were able to do with other receivers that aren't a part of the Packers offense, because you're going to need some in your build, plus tight end, plus running back. But I think as far as the correlation element of this, directionally, if Love's right, he's a drop back passer. He's an efficiency type play. And I think you'll have spike weeks from the different receivers. And I don't think it was dumb. I think this is the way you could do. If you were going to do something like this, it would be with a team that's got young guys that could rotate them. They could have different moments throughout the season where Dobbs could be the guy for the first half of the year and then eventually could kind of just get benched and Wicks could be the guy for a while or whatever. And then, Watson's kind of just sprinkling throughout as a splash play guy and Reed's in his, move role. It wouldn't surprise me, I guess, if all of those receivers had usable weeks while Love is breaking out. So, again, case-by-case thing. But for the Packers, I could see this. This guy said extremely dumb. Yeah, he wasn't a big fan. I might have took Musgrave too. Tiger. I forgot. I mean, at a certain point, you're overstacking for sure. Also had Puka, Kupp, Stafford. Yeah, I mean, that's a really heavily stacked team on those two offenses. Jeremy wants to do a BBM5 draft on stream. You're ready to roll. You're probably ready to come on and do one with me. I'm going to do one with my brother here pretty soon. Have him jump on from Arizona. That'll be fun. But I'm going to go now. We are past the 3-hour mark. A blast hanging out with you guys. Appreciate you all. I'm going to leave for now. I won't be back tomorrow. Go check out Pete's Best Ball Breakfast. Probably won't be back Tuesday. I usually do bananas on Tuesdays. That's why I wanted to make sure to come on today. Probably be back on Wednesday. I want to make Wednesdays sort of a common time slot for these streams. So probably we'll be back Wednesday. Yeah. See you guys then. Take it easy.